Dr. Shiv, are you here?
I'm here.
Yes. Sir, please, if you may.
Namaskar and good afternoon, good morning to all of you. My colleagues from the regional center, respected panelists, coordinators, students, and friends. I'm extremely happy that Regional Center Kolkata is organizing series of national webinars during this pandemic time. This one is second in the series. I'm sure you all will agree with me that this kind of academic discourse, discussions, deliberations will definitely help all of us to update our knowledge in a webinar like this. It gives me immense pleasure and privilege to extend on behalf of IGNOR Regional Center Kolkata, to extend a very warm welcome to all the panelists, coordinators, and above all, to all the students. As a representative of IGNO, it is very important indeed to inform all of you about what IGNO stands for, what has been our objective and commitments towards nation building. In a nutshell, I would like to inform you that IGNO was established by an Act of Parliament in the year 1985 with the main objective of providing higher education to large segment of population without any discrimination based on gender, caste, and religion. Further, to democratize higher education among prospective learners who have aspiration for higher education. Our journey has been very tough. We know that it is not possible for IGNO to achieve its mandate in a year or two. It took us almost 30 years to reach the vast learners to promote higher education among them. Over a period of time, IGNO has been playing a significant role in promoting higher education among the deprived section of the population who could not continue their education due to socio-economic reasons. We've been able to reach the unreached people and also reached the remotest part of this country. The government of India has given us a national mandate and responsibility to share the load of higher education from conventional system of education to contribute towards enhancing gross enrollment ratio. In IGNO alone, contributes between 15 to 20% in enhancing gross enrollment ratio at national level. Of course, IGNO is very different from the conventional system of education when it comes to teaching methodology. IGNO is not into regular face-to-face teaching mode. Of course, we do teach our learners through a huge network of over 5,000 learner support centers located across the country. The learners are also given academic support with the help of learning material, which has the distinction of receiving Excellence Award from the Commonwealth of Learning as a quality self-learning material designed for our learners. We also provide academic support to our learners through technology-enabled education. So IGNO uses every possible multimedia approach to teach our distance learner. Today, IGNO's commitment is to ensure quality, inclusive education, and quality research work. Today, if you see the growth of IGNO in terms of enrollment figure, IGNO has registered over 3.5 million students across the country. This itself speaks about IGNO, its strength and growth. The road ahead for IGNO may be tough in competing with premier education institutions across the country, but we will always remain responsible, focused, and committed towards promoting higher education. This is all I just wanted to share about IGNO. I once again, it's my great privilege to extend a very warm welcome to all our distinguished panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shiv. Well, I can see most of our panelists have already joined in, and I think there was just one. So we'll anyway move on with our schedule, because I can see there's just one person who's not joined as yet. So we'll do that. Um, so, Dr. Shiv, may I continue with the panel discussion?
Yeah, yeah, sure, ma'am.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you
Please
very
go ahead.
much.
Yeah, yeah.
C- Kindly give me a moment. I'm getting a call. Kindly give me a moment. Yes, right. Sorry for the interruption. So yes, I welcome you all to participate in this panel discussion. And after Dr. Shiv has already introduced IGNU to all of you, you realize that IGNU's commitment to quality in research and uh, uh, understanding of dissemination of quality centric education is enormous, and this venture and these panel discussions that we are organizing is part of that endeavor. So, the topic, as you are aware of, it says, does the women's question need a new language? The very fact that this discussion begins with a question poses that it has a huge scope to deliberate from within multiple frameworks. Firstly, do we really need a new language? And if we need a new language, what are the indicators that make it urgent to work towards this new language? Are there any indicators which we need to pose in this, which can direct our endeavors towards this kind of formation of a new language that we are trying to pose? I can give you a couple of instances which shows that women have in many circumstances behaved and expressed their opinions and formed and expressed their choices in very different ways than men have in those circumstances, and those choices that women have made have been responsible in making certain significant historical decisions for the society. Three such examples come to my mind, and I'd like to pose it in front of you. If you remember the Chipko movement, a group of unlettered, uneducated rural women who were from the agrarian communities, they just stepped out of their households, and during the day they walked with lanterns and stood against the district administration. When they were asked, why are you holding lanterns during the day, they said, we can see things which you cannot, and the way you are using the forest is something that we're going to regret later. And the same thing, the same simple language was later on converted into, as society at that time saw the kind of catastrophe that Uttarakhand had experienced. And finally, in 1978, we had the restrictions on plumbing, and we had the plumbering, and we had the restrictions on forest mining. Another very significant, very interesting anecdote would be experiences of Irom Sharmila. Irom Sharmila, a silent Gandhian, who protested non-violently against the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which was imposed in the northeastern insurgency-infested states of Manipur. So her battle and protest went for decades, when she protested non-violently through hunger strikes, and it continued, and she she posed a language against insurgency which was very difficult for society to ignore. Having said this, these were some of my understanding of why we really need to adopt a different language for the way we understand women's question. And once we have established that we need to to form a new language for the women's question, we will then have to decide about what are the meanings that this language is going to entail. What will be the symbolism that this language will entail? What will be the paradigm within which this new language can operate so that it can effectively impact social transformation, so that it can effectively impact policy making and nation building? So, on behalf of IGNU and on my personal behalf, I would like to welcome all our esteemed panelists, the wider fraternity of IGNU, counselors, coordinators, learners, and our invited guest participants into this panel discussion. Uh, just steering a few beginning before we begin the panel discussion, I would like to leave a few introductory words, which I hope will lay the foundation of the entire discussion that we are going to lay out from here on. I decided to address this women's question with a remarkable poem. And before I do so, I would also like to draw your attention to the fact that rather than speaking of the more familiar woman's question, we thought of emphasizing women's question, because the issue really is about representing plurality, about diversity and intersectionality. And I feel that the word women is a more appropriate way of representing that. And as I said, the remarkable poem that I had in mind was Still I Rise, Mari Angelou, the Black American civil rights activist and poet. She says, "You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I will rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulder falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I will rise." This powerful metaphorical connotation of air and dust never fails to make an impact. Light as air and heavy as dust, women of this world, through their stories and histories of exploitation and deprivation, they have never failed to hail humanity with her duties of creation, sustenance, and resilience that she has been part of. Now, of course, I owe you an explanation for the designing the for designing the panel. It is an all women's panel, and I take. I'm sorry, I will just have to take a. Sorry, it. I owe you an explanation because of the way this panel has been designed. It seems like an all women panel, but believe me, it was not intentional, and it was sheer coincidence. Because in spite of my relentless efforts to include acclaimed male expert panelists, the last of our acclaimed panelists had to drop out in the last moment again due to ill health. So I'm very sorry that the panel seems like a very all women discussion panel, because this discussion was not meant to be one such event where few privileged, emancipated, upwardly mobile women academicians and educationists discusses their life experiences, their professional academic research on the existing issues of women's question, and derived from their unique stage of their historical experience. I realized the importance of having this discussion in a platform that would have had a more balanced gender ratio, that is more neutral, more inclusive, and universalistic. I completely own the shortcomings of this panel, but having said this, I'm also reminded of Shami Vivekananda, and one of the most modern spokesperson and supporter of the women's cause. If we go by the kind of support he received from the American women who were frontliners in the suffrage movement, Mrs. Sandra Bowles, Josephine MacLeod, who were drawn to his egalitarian universalism, and that made his and who made his modern practical Vedanta an integral part of their ideological affirmation. Swamiji said, "Let us not offer any solutions for our women's problems. Give them education and they will solve their own problems." I urge our participants to view the shortcomings from this light. Ladies and gentlemen, gathering to deliberate on gender and women is always experienced from a space of extreme humility, responsibility, and privilege. It is an immense burden of responsibility, on one hand, to fairly represent generations of women who lived in the past, who suffered discriminations, and who smothered their aspirations with infinite sacrifices so we could reap the benefits today. On the other hand, it is also an immense responsibility to play the role of an upright torchbearer for women of the future, provide the blueprint of a role model that they who is fit enough to be emulated and who can be followed in their footsteps. We come here in a mood of extreme jubilation and celebration as I congratulate heartily all of you for having made it to this event. It is not just a distance of few kilometers from home, from our workplace, or from the city that we have traveled, not even the span of a technological era from the offline meetings to the online webinars that we have transited. We are talking of an unbridgeable distance that covered aeons of entrenched belief systems, traditions of exploitation, infinite sacrifices, so we could congregate here today. Remember, we carry and embody the inherited legacy of thousands of broken dreams, stories of courage, struggles against sure defeat, and the beaten path of unrequited aspirations of women who are not or were not as fortunate as we are. As we gather here, we need to reflect with gratitude on the opportunity and privilege that this brings to us and the responsibility of duty with which we need to reciprocate. This is no insignificant coincidence, not when we still have countries around us where women are deprived of basic rights of education, freedom, and freedom of expression. Stories of Malala and Fauzia's are narratives of this age. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to draw your attention to the significance of the geographical location of Bengal. Although I know you would, we agree that we met here on primarily on an online footprint, but having said so, Kolkata Regional Center is committed to the jurisdiction of its geographical location in Bengal. And the significance of Bengal and the pioneering visionaries of Bengal Renaissance in the discourse of women's empowerment. Contributions of Raja Ram Mohan Roy, the father of modern India, Ishwar Chandra Vidyashagar, and their undying commitment to universal justice, freedom, rational thought, saw upliftment of women's status as a natural prerogative for their universal vision. The rejection of orthodox Hinduism, caste rigidity, polygamy, child marriage, widow remarriage, all concerns rejected violence against women and kept the issue of women's emancipation central to Bengal's Renaissance. Interestingly, Western Renaissance really failed to make women's emancipation a part of their Enlightenment agenda, unlike Bengal's Renaissance, where men as exemplary visionaries fought for rights of women on their behalf. But human civilization in every part of the world has confronted the challenges from divisive forces, inequality that were founded on color, gender, religion, class, race, etc. And the prospect of creating an equal society has ruffled many thinking minds, and it seemed like an impossible objective to achieve if we consider the whole tenure of human history till today. However, this is a very significant time because contemporary we are confronted in contemporary scenario a very unique situation, which actually takes into consideration which actually takes us to the challenges of global sustainability. We are talking here of an unfathomable challenge of ecosystem ecosystem challenge, crisis, and the challenges of perpetuating a belief system of which sees growth of human endeavors within the limitations of biophysical limitations of our planetary resources. So we are really hitting onto the limits right now, and in a situation such as this, to perpetuate a fragmented world in the name of gender, caste, religion, class could be apocalyptic. And we have to be very, very careful about that in every sphere of life. So instead of envisioning a revolution such as what Marx did, that is violent, and socialism of deprivation and redistribution that curbs growth, affluence, beauty, creativity, leisure, abundance. Why don't we energize our institutions to perpetuate all these good things? All the values of growth, affluence, beauty, creativity, leisure, abundance. We perpetuate them, but with a new value consciousness of equity, justice, and universalism. How can we create a shared values where the rich wants to share in the same way as we can have more men advocating for justice and causes of women? Well, this I hope will lay some of our objectives when we were framing points of reflection that this panel discussion will address. So, just for information of our other participants, the primary point of reflection that this panel is going to reflect on is to engage in social science as a national and natural science perspectives to the understanding of women's question in the post-colonial narrative. Is there a pure scientific foundation to the social divergence between sex? We will also like to explore the possibility of a paradigm shift, a new reconstructed language of representation for women's question, for social transformation and institution building. We will also try and explore and evaluate the dominant Eurocentric, mechanistic, male centric models of Western liberal philosophy with a view to ascertain their accuracy and authenticity in application and knowledge driven policymaking. We will also try and discuss prospects, challenges, and strategies for social transformation and women's empowerment within the framework of universalism, equality and balance for institutionalization of political participation, economic independence, responsible citizenship, local development, socialization, and environmental sustenance. There will also be discussions about case studies which could reiterate the above. Having said this, I will now request our first panelist, Professor Shoma Sen, from the School of Social Work, San Jose State University. She started her academic career in 2007. She holds a dual master's degree in economics and community and regional planning from Iowa State University and a master's degree in social work from the University of Minnesota. Professor Shoma Sen is going to primarily reflect on a theoretical perspective, the transcultural perspective, a postmodern approach to understanding the women's question. And as we had discussed earlier, this is an extremely important submission when it comes to understanding exactly where is the new paradigm going to be located. Professor Shoma Sen, could you please take over?
Yes. A real quick question, Dr. Datto. So someone, I have the slide deck. So someone is going to.
Yes.
Okay.
Kostav, are you there with the Professor Sen's slides?
Yes, madam. Yes, madam. Just 1 minute. I'm opening.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So while the slide deck is coming up, I'd like to start by saying good morning and good evening from California. Um, Thank you all, first of all, Dr. Doctor, for those inspiring words and setting the stage for this important conversation we're about to have. Thank you all for taking your time out of your Sunday mornings to actually join us to talk about something so very important, I think, in the global sense of the word. I'd also like to thank IGNU Kolkata Center, Dr. Shiv Kumar, and others that have put forward this or put together this webinar. I know a lot of work goes behind the workings of such webinars, and we'll be remiss not to thank those that have been responsible for putting this together. We are, in our comfort of our houses and we are presenting, but I know there's a lot of work that goes behind that. So thank you so much for that. I'm really excited to be here to be talking about this particular topic and to share and learn from my esteemed colleague panelists and see where this discussion goes. So I'm ready when you are,
Kostav.
Kostav. Thank you, Kostav, by the way. I don't see you, but your invisible hand is going to help me out.
Well, you can't see him. He's there.
I don't see him.
Madam, just 1 minute. I'm sharing the screen.
Classroom 1 RC Kolkata.
I see.
Yes.
I see the classroom 1 RC Kolkata, but not Kostav.
Just 1 minute, madam. I'm just ready. Sharing the screen.
It's okay. Yeah. Thank you. And Dr. Datto, just to clarify, we have about 20 minutes.
Yes, right.
Thank you. I'll try to stay within that time frame.
I think it is shared now. Are you able to view?
It's coming. Yes. Thank you. Okay. So here we go. The woman's question, the postmodern approach, a transcultural perspective approach to understanding the woman's question. Before I start, though, I would like to preface this entire presentation by saying that I recognize the primacy of Western hegemony in this discussion, and the fact that all the feminist frameworks that we are going to be talking about and mentioned here are grounded in Eurocentric thoughts. However, in order to set the stage for an argument for a paradigm shift, we do need to understand the current paradigms, associated theories, and their limitations. I also want to mention that while I'm referencing this debate, the starting of the debate, as the woman question, we all know that the very nature of this phrase is grounded in androcentric values. That is, it is from the point of view of a man. That is, that there is a universal man who is then accompanied by a universal woman. These are very modernistic ideas, and we'll talk about it in further slides down. It really, therefore, what we should be considering is the women question as Dr. Sujata Doctor has already very eloquently put forward in her introduction. So, why is this knowledge about paradigm important? This is because paradigms and theories are not just intellectual exercises that ivory towers and academics like us engage in. They inform how we define social problems and hence the policy interventions that follow to redress these social issues. And such interventions have real life consequences for individuals, families, groups, communities. So therefore, it is really important to understand the paradigm, the idea of paradigm, and the paradigm shift. I have organized this presentation in the following way. I will start with a quick description of some concepts, paradigms, modern versus postmodern. Then I will situate the feminist theories in these paradigms and identify some of the limitations, and present an alternative paradigm, the transcultural paradigm. Finally, I would demonstrate how this alternative paradigm or perspective is better suited to answer the women's question of our times. I also want to say that I'm going to cover quite a bit of material in a short period of time. So I will move through the slides pretty quickly. However, I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A section. Next slide, please.
So,
Gustav, can I request something?
yes,
Can you please put it as a slideshow, which is, because then it'll move
okay,
easier.
full
Okay,
screen.
well, sorry?
Now, from the first slide.
No, this from here is fine.
Okay.
Or if it's easier, just go from the first slide, please, and then we can just move to this slide.
Yes, this is your first
Okay.
slide.
Okay, thank you.
Pleasure, madam.
So while Kostav is setting that up, I'm going to talk about what is a paradigm and why do paradigm shifts happen. Paradigm simply means a way of seeing the world. It's the entire constellation of beliefs, values, techniques, assumptions, and so on that constitute a way of understanding the reality by the members of a given community or at a certain point in time. A paradigm shift, therefore, constitutes a fundamental change in approach or underlying assumptions that helps us understand reality. Paradigm shifts happen when dominant paradigm is rendered incompatible with new phenomena, which is what we are going to see, that the dominant paradigms of understanding the women's question is no longer valid in our time. So this sort of rendering the current paradigm incompatible is what facilitates the adoption of new theories or new paradigms. So for my presentation, I will primarily be talking about the modern versus postmodern paradigm. But to start, I will give you a very brief and very simplistic story of paradigm shift, again, in the Western thought process. So the modern paradigm came about as a reaction to Dark Ages. In the Dark Ages, the knowledge was confined to priests who claimed to be in direct communication with God and bestowed the knowledge to the masses. However, with enlightenment came the shift when knowledge became available and accessible to masses. At that time, natural sciences were making major headway in understanding reality and the nature of the physical world. Social scientists actually followed suit and adopted the same scientific assumptions and methodology to understand society and human interaction. And therein lies the problem. Since society as we know it is much more complex, chaotic, fluid, ever shifting than the physical world. For example, in the physical world, the force of gravity, the pressure of a substance, the weight of a stone can be quantified and can be understood objectively, which is very much the composition and characteristics of the modern paradigm. So next question, next slide, please. So in the next slide, we are going to talk about the modern versus the postmodern paradigm. Gustav?
Yes,
Is
yes.
this, Kostav, is there some problem? I can't see.
I have changed it. Be able to view.
There we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Professor Sen, is the slideshow okay? Because I can still see this. I'm not seeing the slideshow part of it. I can see
Yeah,
the
It's not a
left side.
slideshow. It's
Yeah,
not a
that's right.
slideshow.
It's
Yeah.
not a
It's not a
slideshow,
slideshow.
Kostav. Please
But it's
check
okay
onto that.
though.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So if you don't, all right. If you don't mind,
Yeah.
that's fine. Okay.
Okay. So I hope you are able, the reason why I asked for a slideshow, because otherwise it might look very, very small. I don't know if you all are able to read. My aging eyes are a little bit problematic sometimes. So but
It's the same for all of us. So I think that's just the problem. You can, Kostav, just try to put on the slideshow if possible, because actually it is looking very, very small.
Slide has changed, no?
so
No,
Kostav, if I may, pardon this interruption, but if I may say, if you look at the icons on the top, the rightmost that looks like a TV kind of
Yes.
thing, if you put that,
No,
that's the slideshow.
I have put it in slideshow mode in my computer.
Oh, but it's not
Okay,
showing.
but I think there's some network disturbance. That's why
oh
you are.
yes, there is some
I see.
there is some network problem.
Okay,
There is
that's
some network.
possible. So maybe can you zoom?
Just
Maybe
increase the size. From here,
of
no,
the,
it's at 70%. Just increase it a little bit.
yeah. Just
Niche.
go down.
Yes.
Niche, sorry.
Uh, Yes.
Yeah. Go down and increase that. That's perfect. Go down. Furthermore, I think it'll be easier.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's better.
Um, actually, could you go back though? Yeah, but the previous slide, please. Yep. Next one. Next one. Yes, thank you. Is this visible? Is it better?
This
I
is
hope
better,
so.
I think so. This is better. Yes, right.
Okay. So what we're talking about here is modern versus postmodern paradigm. So in the modern paradigm, as you can see, reason and science provide accurate, objective, reliable foundation of knowledge. Reason transcends and exists independently of our existential, historical, cultural context. It is a universal truth, whatever that truth may be. Reason will lead to universal truth all cultures will embrace. Language is transparent and benign. And then so in some, truth exists independent of human consciousness and can be known through the application of reasoning. This is the fundamental enlightenment assumption, and all conclusions follow from there. And so if you look at the postmodern, it's just the opposite of what the modern paradigm is saying. And that's because as the social scientists have used this methodology that natural and physical, natural scientists have used to understand the physical world, they've understood that it doesn't really fit. So the postmodern says that reason and science are ideologies and are socially and culturally grounded. The idea of cultural relativism, that reason itself is we're having technical difficulties. That's okay. You know, the funny part, I'm in Silicon Valley, but we're in a black hole of Silicon Valley sometimes.
If you don't mind, I can share her PPT because I have a broadband. I won't be having network issues.
That's
Will you,
Just
simple.
Olvita? Thank you,
you just
Dr.
need to,
Mitra.
but you just need to
No,
email
I'm
it to me
sharing.
quickly.
Actually, there's some network disturbance. That's why.
Acha
Uh,
Costa, can you email her PPT to me? You have my email
just,
ID.
just 1 minute, madam. I'm sharing once again.
And then in the meantime, Kostav,
You're
can
able
you
to see
please
now?
also send it to Dr. Mitra
Just as
Yes,
a
yes.
backup. Yeah.
as a
Be able.
backup? See, it's a community. Community has to come together to solve problems. Okay, can we move
Yeah, because I have
forward?
broadband, so I'm hoping unless there's a power cut, I'm in a slightly
Uh,
better position. Yes.
right. Okay, here we are. Back to where we stopped. So modern versus postmodern. So in this slide, from this slide, what the information that we need to take away is that the tenets of modernity are universal truth, objective reasoning, decontextualized, that you do not bring in culture or any other subjectivity. So in some ways, it becomes quite reductionist, right? So I just wanted to show the difference between modern and postmodern paradigms so that I can situate the feminist theories and the transcultural perspective that I'm going to present in this context. Next slide, please. Okay, so what I want to briefly show is the evolution of feminist theories in answering it still says the woman question, but as I had posited, it's really the women's question. But at the evolution of the feminist theories, they were still answering the woman question because in their mind, there was a universal woman with universal problems. Okay, because it harkens back to the ideas of modernity of a universal truth. So the inception, okay, the call de femme or the woman question, pardon my French, I probably botched the French, but it originally referred to the broad debate from the 1400s to 1700s in Europe regarding nature of women, their capacities, and whether they should be permitted to study, to write, or to govern in the same manner as men. While the French phase, Querelle de Femme, deals specifically with the Renaissance period, the women question is a phrase usually used in connection with a social change in the later half of the 19th century and beyond, which questioned the fundamental roles of women in Western industrialized countries such as the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, etc. So, issues of women's suffrage, reproductive rights, bodily autonomy, property rights, legal rights, medical rights, marriage dominated the cultural discussions in newspapers and intellectual circles, giving rise to the waves of feminism and their corresponding theories. So what I'm presenting here is a really very pared down, simplistic version of the feminist debate and its evolution. In reality, of course, the discussion is much more complex and a discussion perhaps for another day. The purpose of this brief history is to really situate the feminist theories in modernity, particularly the first two waves. So the first wave of feminism, it was about political gains. The second wave of feminism was more about social gains. Personal is political is something that followed from that second wave of feminism. And so and then the third wave, which started incorporating the idea of intersectionality and diversity, I'll come to it in the next slide, is really when there's the movement away from the more modern paradigm to the postmodern paradigm. Next slide, please. And you will have to increase this a little bit. If you could increase the size a little bit. Thank you. Is that better, Dr. Datto? Yes? Okay. All right.
Yes, yes.
So in this slide, what I'm presenting is how early feminist theories are grounded in modernity. Remember, I had talked about those basic tenets of modernity of, objectivity, one way of looking at something, the universality. And so if you look at the left-hand column, that are the characteristics of the modern paradigm. And if you look at the first and second wave of the feminist theories, they are very much, they harken back to the ideas and assumptions of the modern paradigm. Knowledge produced by feminist theories is supposed to be objective. Patriarchy is not sociocultural driven, context driven. Experience of patriarchy is universal, that is aligns with reason will lead to universal truth that all cultures will embrace, which is highly problematic in our day and time. Objectivity of language in understanding women's experience. And hence this question, do we have an objective language? Should we be using a different language? There is also not only one way of understanding patriarchy and women's lived realities. So you can see the first and second wave of feminism were very much aligned with the modern paradigm. Next slide, please. Okay. Before I get to that, I wanted to say that later feminist theories start to actually, Kostav, can you go back to the previous slide? I'm sorry. I still should stay here. Yes, please. Thank you. So even though these are the first and second wave of feminist theories, the later feminist theories or later waves of feminist theories started to move in the right direction and are more postmodern in nature by integrating the idea of intersectionality, which basically means that any individual is a product of multiple intersecting identities, since human beings at any given time are members of multiple groups, right? So for myself, I'm just not a woman. I'm a woman in the United States, a woman of color. So I have multiple intersecting identities. I am a faculty member, I'm a professor, I have multiple intersecting, I'm a daughter, I am a wife. So all these make me who I am, right? So the later feminist theories, started to understand this. And this idea of intersectionality really came from Black feminist movement, particularly when Kimberly Crenshaw, when she started saying that Black women do not experience patriarchy in the same way white women do. And so we know that inherently or instinctively, we know that it is not a universal factor. So that idea of intersectionality is absolutely crucial. And I'll highlight this later on further down the slides. So, yes. So despite this movement towards understanding the lived experience of women in a more complex manner, I would argue that the current analytical tools that feminist theories give us, even though they are postmodern, they're still limited. Their strength lies in the analysis of the macro and the structural factors such as culture, religion, caste, socioeconomic status, etc., to understand the impact of these forces in answering the woman's question. However, as we all know from our personal experiences, that an individual operates at the confluence of the micro and the macro, the self and society. So any analytical tool that does not incorporate a consideration of the self and just considers the environment in which an individual is embedded, I would argue falls short as a holistic heuristic model. Next slide, please. So then this is going to bring me to this transcultural perspective. I would like to present this model that addresses, in my opinion, my humble opinion, the limitations that were articulated before. This is a model that has 5 interrelated dimensions that I will argue will help us understand the women's question more thoroughly. Just a little bit about this model. This is a model that was developed by faculty at the School of Social Work in my own school at San Jose State University. And we use this to teach our students how to work with diverse populations, whether they're engaged in working with individuals or making macro policy decisions. This serves both as an analytical tool and a process tool. And what do I mean by that? This model allows us not only to understand the social issues by exploring each of these components individually and together, but it also allows us to collaborate and gives us a guideline to collaborate with each other to create social change, because it allows us to understand the others while understanding ourselves. It is a model that can help build social capital that is so essential for social movements. It can be seen as a multidisciplinary model. For example, the psychologist, the biologist can help us understand the personal, the self. Sociologists, economists, religious leaders perhaps can help us understand the macro domains. It is an ecological model that considers the fact that an individual is embedded in various social systems, and these systems are in dynamic interactions with each other. It is not just a conceptual framework for me personally. I use it consistently in my personal and professional lives, in my work with my students, in collaborating on my research with my academic colleagues from different disciplines, as well as with my colleagues from NGOs. So I would say that it is a tried and tested model. I'll go through each of these domains really quickly. The ideas here are nothing new, but maybe the novelty of this model is how these domains are put together in a cohesive whole. Next slide, please. So, cultural knowledge. Culture, as we all know, is defined as shared lifestyle, customs, habits, skills, technology, all of that. It's the entire ethos of a group of people. Culture allows then both affirms facets of human behavior that are across culture, that are common across culture. So in the context of India, what are the common themes across our regional cultures? But it also provides a framework for understanding the difference across these regional cultures, for example. Next slide, please. Power, privilege, and oppression. This power relation is defined by three concepts. Privilege is unearned advantages that are enjoyed by members of dominant social categories. Okay, and we're talking about patriarchy in this, but there are other issues as well, right? Oppression is basically physical, emotional, psychological, and structural subjugation of an individual by social structures, groups. And structural context is government, legal, economic, and other institutional forces that position certain groups over others and create a power hierarchy and reify these structures. They collude to reify these power structures in society. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Professor Sen, if you could summarize.
You mean I'm out of time?
Yes, a little.
Okay. Could I have a few more minutes since
Sure.
there was a little bit of
Sure,
5 more
sure.
minutes?
Please do that. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Positionality, this assumption here, I have a couple more slides, Dr. Datta. Okay.
Okay.
Positionality is here, the positionality asks the questions, how do one's social location and social group membership influence worldviews, values, and behaviors? This is connected to the concept of intersectionality. So the assumption here is that every individual has a unique position in society, depending upon their caste, their socioeconomic status, religion, etc. And from that social location, they're perched on that social location, and from that point, they have a very unique view of society. So I have a very unique social location that is different from my colleagues, and we're looking at the same world. However, we may be looking at it, we may have a different perspective. Next slide, please. And this is an important part. This is self-reflexivity. This is the idea that is very crucial in this model, which says, how does one's own life experience shape the perception of oneself and others? And so it is about critical self-reflection and critical self-awareness, how meanings are created by interaction of the self and the other, and how one's position in larger society's structure may influence interaction and power dynamics. Next slide, please. So the next slide is respectful partnership, and such a partnership is defined as adopting an approach to working across culture that is characterized by a spirit of inquiry, humility, and collaboration. Next slide, please. And this is the final domain, which is the cultural competency or cultural humility. It is the process by individuals and systems respond respectfully to all levels of diversity. And cultural competency strives to protect and preserve the dignity of all. Last slide. Okay, so circling back to the women's question and how this particular the transcultural perspective helps us understand and give us a different paradigm. In order to understand the condition, the nature, etc. of women, now we have a very comprehensive model that takes into account not only the macro forces but gives equal weight to the individual. As a very quick thought exercise, which you don't have to engage in, but something to think about. How does the following women experience patriarchy? The wife of a successful professional who does not work outside the house, a retired civil servant on pension, a rural subsistence farmer, an executive from a donor lending agency, a sex worker, a victim of human trafficking. They all experience patriarchy in different ways, right? So therefore, the solution to the patriarchy has to be different. And so this model starts from the assumption that the women's question has to be contextualized and situated in the culture and community of the context. Not all women will experience patriarchy in the same way. How a woman responds to the forces and try to marginalize them very much depends on the individual, their positionality, their sense of self, and how they understand the world as a result. It recognizes that understanding the self is as important as understanding the other and society. And no change process is possible without a critical self-reflection being at the heart of that process. Thank you. Next slide. That's the end of my slide. Thank you so very much. I rushed through it with a little bit of technical glitches here and there, but I'm happy to answer questions in the Q&A section.
Thank you very much, Professor Sen. This is indeed, this was indeed something that it is long awaited. To actually have a model, as you said, which incorporates the macro and brings it again, contextualizing it again to individual women's stories. I see it all coming together, and thank you so much for setting the tone of this panel discussion, because this is exactly what the question was. Do we need, or does the women's question need a new language? And you have rightly directed the first theoretical paradigm for that. Thank you so much. And now we come to another extremely interesting perspective, which as Shoma, Professor Sen had just done, she was trying to bring to us how the Eurocentric dominance of the Western liberal philosophy, what they really managed to do was cut off a very, very important part of the global or the common inherited knowledge systems. We have what post-colonialism or what colonialism did was it completely overshadowed certain very, very important perspectives of human knowledge. And here is what Dr. Orpita Mitra is going to present to us, which is so very interesting. And I'm not going to spoil because when I was reading your abstract, it caught me so much into this thing. I'm just waiting to listen to what you have to say, bringing this completely different paradigm into this into feministic studies, and talking about bringing Vedanta into it. Please, Orpita, go ahead. I'm just so waiting to listen to your presentation.
Do you want me to run my own PPT? I can
Yeah,
do
I
that.
think that would be better. I think that would be better, because so that we can, we can avoid the glitches. And in the meantime, Kostav, maybe you can just update your what's going wrong with our, because we have the couple of
Madam,
other presentations which are going to be
Madam, I-
which are going to follow, and for which you have to present. Yes, yes, Dr. Mitra, you would please take on the.
I'm audible, I hope.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, okay. When I'm presenting, the problem is just that I'm not able to see the rest of you, okay? Because if it's in the slide mode, then I won't be able to see the rest of you. So if
Don't
I go
worry.
wrong anywhere, if something goes wrong, you just let me know. Okay,
Right.
so my subject today is Sri Sharada Devi, a new paradigm for independent women. Independent woman, yeah, independent women. I mean, sorry, I didn't pay attention to the singular or plural aspect of it. We all know who Sri Sharada Devi is. She was the spiritual consort of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda's guru. So she needs no introduction. I'll start off from where Shomadi left, which is this point about intersectionality. You know, in the context of India too, gender studies in the context of India, the predominant intersection that we study these days is that between caste and gender. In the West, it's race and gender, and here it's caste and gender, and there's a little bit of class and gender more or less everywhere. But I feel that this is a very important thing to study, the intersection of caste and gender. But somewhere I feel that this challenge that third world feminism posed to white feminism in the form of questioning a universal paradigm for women, whether we have been able to do justice to this question, whether we have really been able to address this question, because addressing this question also needs to, I mean, it calls us not only to understand how patriarchy operates in a different context, but it also requires of us to understand how autonomy has operated in a different context. You know, our perspective will emerge from our own history. Even today, you know, Sujata, you began with a poem from the Black feminist context, but what is our context? So having said that, these are some of the women who are associated with the Ramakrishna Vivekananda Bhavdar, I would say, the tradition. Some of them are Indian, as you can see, and some of them are Western. And they all, in their individual ways, I mean, they're obviously their social contexts were very, very different. You know, the Indian women that you see, they're either widows, young widows, or they were sannyasinis, or people who took the vow of brahmacharya at a very young age. And India was a subjugated nation. And the Western women you see, they were all from the quote unquote free West. At least they had education. And they also had a certain degree of freedom from their family and from the class that they used to belong to.
Dr. Mitra,
So there's,
sorry to
yes,
interrupt.
yes.
We can't see your slide with the pictures.
Okay, just a second.
So we are at your first slide.
Yes, I think that happens when it goes into the slide mode. Can you see
Okay.
my
It is
thing
visible
now?
to all.
Yeah, can you see this now?
Yes,
Can you
yes,
see the
yes.
slide
Yes,
now?
Yes,
it's visible.
much better. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think this is a problem which happens when we go into the slide mode on this. So I think if this is visible, I don't have to dense it. So,
It's
so I
visible,
can
it's
also
fine.
see you then. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
So
go on.
these women were definitely from different social contexts, and individually also they were very, very different. You know, temperamentally they were different, and they all, for those of you who know, I'll just quickly go through the first one from left, upper row, Sharada Devi, then Jogin Ma, Golap Ma, Gaurima, Sister Sudhira, and the row below from left, Josephine MacLeod, Sarah Bull, Sister Nivedita, Sister Christine, Mrs. Xavier. They all played a very, very significant role in the work for India. it's very unfortunate that as a common person, we do not know what all they have done for the Indian women and for the Indian cause and for Indian society. But this is not the platform to uh, recapitulate that. But what I wanted to point out is that this tradition has accommodated very different kinds of personalities, very different kinds of women in a very meaningful way. All of them did something or the other for Indian society in their own way. My today's focus is on Sri Sharada Devi. Uh, I need to zoom this slide a bit because there's a text here. So I'm just zooming here. I hope it's visible.
Yes, yes, visible.
This is Sister Nivedita's description of Sri Sharada Devi. We all know that she was a village woman. As the custom of the villages, she was married off at a very young age, and she was almost unlettered, not completely actually, but almost. I mean, she didn't continue the formal education, and most of the time she spent her time with household chores. So it's a very different context from our own context, and also from Nivedita's context, because Nivedita was an educationist. She was already a woman who was working in the public sphere in the United Kingdom. And her observation about Sharada Devi, in her, one sees realized that wisdom and sweetness to which the simplest of women may attain. So, for being wise and for being sweet, you don't need any extra baggage. You know, you don't need to be a professor, you don't need to be an activist, you don't need to be anything very, very special. And yet, to myself, the stateliness of her courtesy and her great open mind, mark the words, her great open mind, I'll come to her great open mind shortly, are almost as wonderful as her sainthood. I have never known her hesitate in giving utterance to large and general judgment, however new or complex might be the question put before her. Her whole experience is of theocratic civilization, which means that she belongs to that old world, God-centric world. Yet she rises to the height of every situation. With unerring intuition, she goes straight to the heart of the matter and sets the questioner in the true attitude of the difficulty. This is the testimony of a Western educated, quote unquote, liberated woman who left everything to come to India for the Indian work. This is her statement about Sri Sharada Devi. So I'll escape this mode now. Now, you see that there is a very stark contrast between Nivedita's life and Sharada Devi's life. I need not reiterate that contrast. But her great open mind, once two girls from Madras came to Calcutta, they were 22-year-old, and they were not yet married. Now, that was a revolutionary thing in that age, 22-year-old girl not yet married. And she greatly encouraged these two women and said that how well they have picked up so many skills. They know knitting, they know this, they are trying to stand on their feet. And in our rotten country, Amader Poradeshe means Bengal, the moment the girl is a little old, you say, Porogotra kore dao. You say that marry her off. So this statement coming from a woman of, high caste Hindu woman belonging to a conservative society, who was not even part of the formal education system. This is an ultra-revolutionary statement. Even to a mother who had once come to her, Bengali mother, saying that I have 5 daughters, I can't marry them off. She said, you can't marry them off, so what is there to worry about? Just put them in Nivedita school and they'll learn something and they'll be able to stand on their own feet. So it's a good thing. I mean, they'll become independent. So these are revolutionary statements coming from a woman of her social background. So this is the backdrop, and she's often revered as a saint, even a goddess for devotees, a universal mother, spiritual teacher. While all that is correct, I would like to focus on her as the human model, the ideal modern woman, the model woman worker that India would need for the work of the future. We are already needing it now. During her time, it was the work for the future. The first thing that I would like to emphasize on is, when we are talking about women's emancipation, we need to understand that women as women have a role to play for universal welfare. Nivedita had said that to be sensitive to great causes, This is one of the many things that constitutes true emancipation for women. So, women's emancipation cannot be divorced from the larger context of universal welfare. And if we fail to recognize our special role in that, we would actually be undermining our own potential as women. So now what is required to take up this responsibility of universal welfare? Of course, it is a responsibility of every human being, irrespective of their gender. But since here we are discussing the women's question, so I would like to focus on this. What would be the requirement for our role? And I must of necessity speak in the first person. So I take it as an epistemological position that I prefer to speak in the first person here. So what is the role that we need to play for our work in this project of universal welfare? We would all agree that women's sympathy for other women is one of the major conditions for the success of the women's movement. And we see that, to be very honest, we see that often we fail to do so even in the context of a family or, our working environment, the office or the work context. We often fail to do so even in our personal context. So to be able to focus on this area, because this is very important for team building, without which there can be no meaningful work for larger society. So team building is really an area where women need to work on. Even the feminist movements have acknowledged it. And the fact that we are divided across so many categories of race and caste, they do hinder, from a socio-political and economic point of view, they hinder the unification of women. And as we also teach in class, that it is easier for people of one caste to unite, or it's easier for people of one class to unite. But it is very difficult for all the women to unite. What are you going to unite against? So you have to unite for something rather than uniting against something. Now, this team building. Before going into the examples that we can get from Sharada Devi's life, let me give a little bit of context to those who are not so aware of her life context. Most of her life she spent in the home environment with other women. And these other women in her context were really, what should I say, they can be a collection in a museum. One was her surrogate daughter, her niece, Radhu, who almost went half mad because of the torture of her husband. Then her mother, Radhu's mother, who gave the responsibility of looking after her daughter to Sharada Devi, but was at the same time jealous of Sharada Devi. So she would also accuse her often that you want to take away my daughter from me. Then there was another lady, Maku. Then there was Nolini. All her family members who belonged from that absolutely conservative old world. If a crow put some droppings on their clothes, they would go and keep on bathing again and again just to feel that they are pure. That kind of environment and upbringing and conditioning. Even some of them would tell Sharada Devi, oh, you are a Brahmin woman, so you ate rice, you partook of rice twice. Maybe she did so to give some prasad. So this is her context. And there were other women too, of course, Gaurima and Jogin Ma, who were her spiritual companions. But everybody was not of the same level. So she had to really deal with a whole team, and a very heterogeneous team. And at the same time, she would also welcome the Western disciples who would come. Nivedita, Mrs. Bull, Josephine MacLeod. So you have to understand, the kind of range she had in terms of being able to address the intercultural context. So these are all exceptional qualities, and these are all qualities that one needs for team building. And she was the ideal team builder. And from her life, we get the principles for team building. One, mutual appreciation. She said that she was absolutely in the habit of appreciating every small thing. Somebody would bring some gift, while others would try to find out what are the imperfections in that. She would emphasize on the fact, she would appreciate that endeavor. She was always appreciating. For a team to run, appreciation and mutual appreciation is a major principle. And the second is no fault finding. Sarada Devi said, Loke shudhu dosh dekhe, gunti dekha chai. People only see faults, but one needs to see the qualities. And mutual appreciation is actually the antidote to fault finding. If we want to move away from this habit of fault finding, then we have to move towards this habit of appreciation. So that changes our vision. And of course, being in a team requires forbearance, which she had. She had an exceptional quantity, exceptional degree. We may not aspire, we may not have to an exceptional degree, but we have to aspire for some degree of forbearance for a team to sustain. Then the third, focus on construction and not destruction. Again, Sarada Devi said, "Bhangte pare shobai, gorte pare kojon." Everybody can destroy. Power of destruction lies with everybody. But how many can really construct? How many can really create? And how many can really sustain? So that is a very important thing. So you see that it's the focus on the positive rather than focus on the negative, all these three things. Then fourth, leadership. She was undoubtedly the leader in her context. Nobody needed to tell that, but she never threw her weight around. She never posed as the leader. But how was her leadership manifest? First of all, as Nivedita said, she never hesitated to give large pronouncements, large and general judgments. Her judgments were always grounded in knowledge. Knowledge of what? Our traditional knowledge of Vedanta says that we are the pure and deathless Atman. All her judgments were grounded in this knowledge, because we need to realize that even love, service, care, such virtues have to necessarily proceed from this knowledge. This knowledge is the fountainhead of all ethics. So I'll give you one example. Once one of the brahmacharis asked her mother, "How do you look upon me?" So what answer would you expect? She would say, "Oh, I look upon you as my child." That is what she looked upon everybody like. But what was her reply? She said, "I look upon you as Brahman. You are Brahman, my child, you are Brahman." Now, how many mothers can actually tell their children you are Brahman, or even think that their children are Brahman? Madalasa did. We have this example in the Markandeya Puran. The queen Madalasa, when her son was born, he was a baby in the rocking thing, she used to sing that song to him, which said that you are the pure, deathless Atman. Sarada Devi was not a biological mother, but she was a mother. So she looked upon her children as Brahman. So this is a position grounded in knowledge. And then the second, now, this knowledge gives us the wisdom to mitigate conflict. If one is not established in this knowledge of oneness, it becomes difficult to mitigate conflict from an impersonal position. We are likely to take sides. The second is sense of responsibility. She always invariably took all responsibility on her own shoulders. It's my child, so I have to do it. So she would just go, she would take the initiative, she would go ahead and take all the responsibility on her own shoulders. Third is care. Care. Service or care, whichever way you are comfortable to put it. Service is a more conscious thing. Care may not be implicated in that entire philosophy of service, but still we can care. We can care for everybody around us. We can care for our domestic helper. We can care for the animal, the cat outside. She used to literally do that, even the animals. So care for the the kitten outside, care for the plants, care for everybody, literally everybody, the sweeper, anybody. So it is possible to do that. And she manifested in her life that the leader is the foremost servitor. We talk about servant leadership today. So the leader is the foremost servitor. She used to serve everybody with her own hands. And the fourth principle or condition for leadership is harmony and synthesis. She was always capable of harmonizing conflicting, contradictory things, harmonizing different personalities. You see, her team itself is so heterogeneous. Harmonizing as well as synthesizing. She would often give judgments which were a synthesis of different positions. She would say, to your tick, and then she would give her judgment. She would not refute anybody's position. Yes, what you are saying is right. And then she would gently put forward her conclusion. Then the fifth condition is freedom. freedom, we have to be free and we have to give freedom. We are free. We just need to realize that. The day we realize that, we would automatically give freedom. Freedom is the opposite of the will to dominate. It is the will to dominate that destroys organizations. It is the will to dominate that destroys units, families, teams, because we cannot give that space of freedom to others. We want freedom for ourselves, but we cannot give that freedom to others. So freedom is the opposite of the will to dominate, which is a very, very key point for leadership and team building. I think I have covered most of the important points. And here on my slide, you see knowledge, service, care, responsibility, independence. I'll come to leadership, harmony, empowerment. Responsibility is empowerment. The moment we take responsibility, anybody, not just a man or a woman, the moment we take responsibility, that is our moment of empowerment, because we are no longer dependent. Independence means not being dependent on something. So the moment we take responsibility on our own shoulders, we are no longer dependent on anything else for our own survival or progress. I mean, so women used to tell her, some women would come and tell Sarada Devi, oh, there's so much conflict in the household, Ashanti, Ashanti, there's so much conflict, I just cannot stay in that house. She used to say that, Kuthai Ashanti, where is conflict? With all the conflict around her, she could discover the inner peace, and that is real independence. It's not easy. I'm not at all trying to sermonize or say that it's easy, but it is something that we need to recognize at least. Independence. This is my next point about Sharada Devi, that she had a tremendous independence of mind. When she was a young bride in the village, people used to say, oh, your husband is a madman. All the villagers used to say, to the extent that she stopped going to the neighbor's house, because she knew that if she gets out of the house, people will start saying that, oh, you were married off to a madman, you are unfortunate child. So she stopped stepping out of the house. Then one day, finally, she said, okay, I'll go and see for myself. She didn't believe a single word of that, grapevine, not a single word, because she had already seen her husband when she was married. And what people were saying did not match her own judgment. So finally she said, okay, I'll go for myself and see. She was so young then. She was very young, barely a teenager towards the other side. I mean, about to be an adult or something, but she could say that at that age. And from her background, she could say that. There's a tremendous independence of mind. We know that she was a devoted wife to Ramakrishna, but it's not that she agreed with all his positions. It's not that she defied him, but if she had a better logic to provide, if she had a better reason to act otherwise, she would give that reason and quietly do what she thought was right. So that is independence of mind, without compromising other people's dignity or one's own dignity. You can stand on your own position because it is grounded in something. It is grounded in knowledge, and it is also grounded in care. So now I have covered all the points in my slide. Now the next slide is, I'll conclude, Shujatadi. This is just part of my conclusion. Vivekananda had said that Vedanta is the religion of the future enlightened humanity. We have to become Vedantists and live this great thought. The masses must get it. Vedanta in one line, it's the Advaitic position that we are all Atman. We are not these bodies. We are this immortal Atman. And here we are all one. We don't have these individual subjective selves. This is just the manifestation of our worldly life here, but that is not the truth. And he said that the new cycle must see the masses living Vedanta, and this will have to come through women. So look at his expectation and the call and the responsibility that he's putting on the shoulder of women. Are we prepared to play that part? That is the big question. And for that, this focus on team building and widening our horizon beyond our individual lives or beyond our own families to the larger society, to the national cause, to the cause of the whole environment, the whole ecology, the entire universe. It is our responsibility equally as women. To conclude, I would say that It is said that man and woman are like the two wings of a bird. I would go one step further and say that women are the foundation of society, in fact. I don't want to sound deterministic or essentialist. We should definitely try to avoid falling into that trap, of any kind of determinism or essentialism. But as a woman, I mean, Vedanta is the destination, it's a genderless state. But while the destination is genderless, the path is gendered. We need to recognize that. The destination may be genderless, where man and woman are equal as the Atman, but the path to that destination is gendered. So we need to figure out the specificity within which women operate without falling into the trap of determinism or essentialism. Is there something very specific to the female organism, some very special role, very special qualities that will help? And there's no reason to believe that we can't have qualities because we are women. Maybe we have been failing, but there's no reason to believe that we don't have these qualities inherently, right? So I would go that step further and say that women are the foundation of society, not necessarily as mothers. Earlier this idea was based on this belief, okay, women are mothers, so they're naturally the foundation of the family and for the society. I'm not saying it from this perspective. Even if a woman chooses not to have a family or not to have children, not to go that way, even then she is the foundation of society. Simply because we are more powerful. That we are. We see several instances, even from the biological field. And it is not a burden, but it is our responsibility, the responsibility for universal welfare. And we cannot shy away from that. If you are talking for a different language for women's empowerment and emancipation, I would say it would be the language of knowledge and service, the language of responsibility and care. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mitra, for that excellent presentation. And so Dr. Sen had set the ball rolling for identifying a paradigm, and she had given us a constructed model by which this could be, and that brought us to Dr. Orpita Mitra, who's found in Vedanta, and especially in the workings of Indian, in the workings of exemplary Indian women, who, in spite of having been, operationalizing under multiple level of exploitative, so it was colonialism, it was social exploitation, it was narrow fundamentalism, it was all kinds of different levels of exploitation. In spite of that, we have identified a model which really worked, a model which was derived from Vedanta, and examples like Ma Sharoda into the. Thank you very much. And that brings us now to another extremely interesting presentation, which will now set the floor rolling for what which would kind of legitimize most of the understandings. I'm sorry to use the word legitimize, but somehow to be a scientifically rational, positive, objective society is the objective of humanity, to be said. So now, since we're locating a paradigm, it is also our effort to see what does natural science have to say about all these demarcations. And we have extremely Dr. Ina Banerjee, are you here? Thank you so much, Dr. Banerjee. I know
Professor Roy Banerjee, please.
Professor Banerjee, very nice to have you here. I know the timing was a little inconvenient for you, but I'm really happy that you could make it here, because somehow your presentation will kind of lay the bedrock for whatever we are discussing out here, because this is what science will have to say. What is the difference of sexes? Does it have any kind of scientific determinism in that sense, pure science and natural science, whatever? So Professor Banerjee, please take on the floor.
Thank you. Namaskar to all of you, and it is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Dr. Sujata Datta Hazarika, for having me. but today, as we say in Bengali, I am like a hongsho moddhe bokojatha, and both the bok and the hongsho have their own roles to play. And I'm very surprised, we had these long discussions, and from what Professor Shoma Sen said, and then from what Dr. Orpita Mitro said, it is so grounded in what I am going to say now, and this is all hard science. So please forgive me if my presentation is a bit longish, because I will be presenting data from the natural world. And what we will be trying here is establish some of the points that uh, people from social sciences and people from history have been discussing. So what I'll do is, let me switch off my video, which is going to eat up some bandwidth, and I'll keep my audio on, and then I'll present my screen. And should there be any problem with the connection on which we don't have any control, then maybe Dr. Dotto Hajarika may call me. I think that will be the best thing. I'm keeping my phone
Okay.
besides me, because I see sometimes there's a little bit of a wavering. So this will be slightly longish, because what we are trying to establish here is from a completely hard science point of view. I'm an immunologist. I have been trained in immunology and regenerative medicine. We work mostly in biotechnology, posited completely in the field of zoology. I'm a professor at the Department of Zoology, Kolkata Vishwavidyalaya, and my lab works in various biotechnological fields to answer questions and to find solutions. So when Dr. Dotto Hajarika asked me to speak on feminism, which was the first, the word that was used, does the women's question need a new language? It was earlier, does post-feminism need a new language? So technically, I am not at all aware of how this is posited in social sciences or the philosophical interpretation of this particular phenomenon. But what I would like to stress upon is a very matter of fact, very survivalist, a very functional way by which the female sex has evolved. And funnily, the speakers before me were echoing exactly this, and this we will see through the various data. So my talk I have titled as Biological Determinism in the Difference of the Sexes, and I have made my presentation very heterogeneous, very asymmetrical, because I cannot stress enough how stochastic, how random, how unplanned evolution is. And therefore, there is nothing planned, and there is, nothing, should be, shouldn't be, correct, incorrect. It is completely an open flow of things that happen, much like Sri Krishna has said in his Gita. Everything is very random, very chance. So we will be talking about the probabilisms and how it has been posited in the biological world. If you can follow my cursor, you'll see this is the Zika virus, which is about 0.045 micrometers. And this is the hair on our heads or on our bodies, because we are mammals. And somewhere here is the coronavirus, which is wreaking havoc in us. So talking about feminism, it already existed in the natural realm, and it was first reported by somebody called Dr. Esther Lederberg, who reported the existence of sex in bacteria, in the sense that the male has the F factor, the fertility factor, which is a set of plasmid, or set of genes on a plasmid that it injects by a conjugation tube, and presence of the F factor allows it to form the conjugation tube by which it puts in this extra bit of information into the female's or the recipient's plasmid. Why is that so? Because in a changing environment, and this is completely unknown, the changes of temperature, of pressure, of the predominant gases in air, of the biotic and the abiotic factors that compose the ecosystem is completely unknown. We do not know For example, as we are going on the internet, we do not know. I saw a few drops of rain coming down, and we do not know if the internet is going to work. So the changing environment is something that we are completely unaware of, and the evolution of the sexes was to provide for a more complex system which is progressively higher in quantitative and qualitative reception. Reception meaning receiving of the information from the environment via the food, via the air we breathe, via the atmosphere that we are in. For example, right now we are at a very enriching webinar discussing the women's question. So the reception is important, and then how we process it. So when we process it, we need a set of very complex processing nodes or information processing centers, and these translate into the cells, the molecules, the receptors, the nuclei, and how they functionally are correlated in a dynamic interrelationship. And this results in the response of the organism to its changing environment. So the female sex or the sex, the different sexes was evolved to make provisions for such changes that one doesn't know about. Now, Dr. Orpita Mitra made a very interesting statement that we are the foundation, and I will proceed to prove what she said with my biological knowledge. And this is something that I do not know how many people from science are here, so I will be slightly going into the classroom teaching mode. So there's the nucleus, which contains the genome in a eukaryotic cell, which is a fully formed cell with a cytoplasm, a good plasma membrane, and a nucleus with its expressing and non-expressing DNA. In the cytoplasm, so this is the genome in the nucleus. Half of it comes from the father, half of it comes from the mother. But the mother's ovum contains the cytoplasm, which also has the phenomenon called epigenome. So extra genomic information that modulates the genome. And the cytoplasmic determinant
Can you
No, you
yeah.
have to call her Sujata Di. She just said, "Na, she's kept the phone." Yeah.
Oh my God.
foundation or the vehicle or the stroma is entirely Dr. Dotto Hajalika, are
Yes,
you
yes,
trying to
I
call
was,
me?
yes, I was
Yes,
trying to
we
call you
lost
because
you.
we lost you for a while. We lost you for a while. Can you just go back to that genome slide that you were telling us about that? We
Which
stopped
one? Which one?
the asset
This one?
versus liability. No, after that, asset versus
This one?
liability.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
here only.
the genome thing. You were trying to tell us about the female. Yeah, right, that one.
Okay,
Can you just
okay.
yeah?
Yeah. So you see, my phone is very much on, and I'm so sorry
Thank
for
you.
this.
Thank you
Okay.
very much. We didn't want to lose you at all.
All
Yeah.
right. So you see, again, I repeat, I echo Dr. Orpita Mitro when she said we are the foundation, and she was not making an exaggeration or an overstatement at all, because biology shows that for the next generation to come up, it needs the genome, which is half of the father and half of the mother, and the entire cytoplasm of the mother, which contains the microRNAs, the non-coding DNAs and RNAs and various proteins, which are the cytoplasmic determinants, and form the epigenome. That means this creature, which is going to come up from the fusion, the fertilization of the sperm and the ovum, is going to carry half of the genomic information of the father and half of the genomic information of the mother, but the entire epigenome is decided by the cytoplasmic determinants, which make the most recent common ancestor, the Eve, whose fossilized remains was found somewhere in Africa, to be the most recent common ancestor, like I said, of all existing humankind. And you see that it is a matrilineal tree, phylogenetic tree, because none of the cytoplasm of the father is inherited by the organism. So we are not being boastful, we are not being hysteric, and we are not being unjustly feministic, quote unquote, but we are speaking the truth. So the sexual dimorphism, let us discuss a little bit about why the sexual dimorphism happened and what purpose it serves. Sometimes it is to an advantage and sometimes it is to a disadvantage. And here I will definitely be speaking slightly tongue in cheek because I am a woman. So the sexual dimorphism, obviously, the natural selection plays a very important role. How the female has the prerogative to choose her mate, and the male, poor creature, has to be all colorful, has to have these antlers, and has to go into all these terrific fights with the other possible males, because he needs a reproductive success. His life does not matter. So how long he is there on the earth really does not matter, but whether he is able to pass on his genes. And by the way, the prerogative to choose the mate lies entirely with the female. Sometimes poor creatures, they have to face a disadvantage because the males are visible targets for predators, while the drab females, they don't look quite so nice, but they are the ones that selection pressure and natural selection favors. So they look for good looking mates for a fit, healthy offspring, but they live much longer. But the sexual dimorphism may not entirely be for mate selection. It could also be for exploring different resources. For example, from the beaks of the woodpeckers, one can find out that resource hunting is another important aspect of the evolution of the sexes. In the spiders, we see that the females are usually larger than the males. Why is it so? Because the body of a female being larger can accommodate a larger number of eggs. So there are two types of selections, the R selection and the K selection. The ones with a large number of offsprings usually lose a number of offsprings, and the ones with smaller number of offsprings has greater parental care. So the behavior of the female is very decisive for the fate of the species, as we shall see in the subsequent slides. This is a creature producing a large number of offsprings, and the larger body size also allows it to exploit food sources. So here we will see towards the conclusion of my slide that often the larger female spider eats up the poor mate who has to mate because his hormones will not leave him alone. So he is not volunteering to be eaten by his wife so that she can provide good nutrition for the offsprings. But the female, because she is a mother, she will eat up the male because now he is quite redundant. But once her offsprings are born, she will offer her own body as food for the children. So we see here the mate is not volunteering, but the mother eating up the mate sounds really horrible, the black widow, but ultimately she is offering her body to to her offsprings, and here she is volunteering. The male, by the way, if he can escape, he will very much try to do that. So the evolutionary perspective is it allows multi-layered genomic component mixing. We need the heterogeneity. Why? Because the environmental shifts are unforeseen. We want to be able to deal with whatever changes that environment throws at us. We want to keep those options in our heterogeneous through our heterogeneous mixing of options. So we want to keep our options. We see our COVID-19 making variants because he is trying to get better options to survive in a changing environment. And here environment is anthropogenic. We are coming up with vaccines and medicines and whatnot. The next is the larger repertoire of potential response to environmental shifts, which also entails resource hunting. And the third is propagation of the species through competition, predation, parasitism, and other resource constraints. So food, fear, and libido are the three main aspects. They need to eat, they need to propagate, and they need to defend themselves against a possible adverse situation. So we've been hearing the other speakers talking from a social perspective on the gender divide, and lamenting how women tend to be exploited under various situations, and how Dr. Dotto had asked a very interesting question, which I would like to discuss in the end. So how the female of the human species has accepted this male dominance more or less universally. So we will put some other arguments here, and this is the alpha females. And when I will go to the subsequent slides, you will see that none of the arguments put forth by our esteemed male co-owners of the earth, that they are physically stronger or they are more rational and more gifted and more whatnot, it does not work in some of the largest, mightiest, and most ferocious of predators, and one of the largest creatures on earth. Here, these are alpha female-led packs where the females are physically stronger than the males. They are longer lived. They are philopatry, that is, they spend most of their lives in one area, whereas the males are free-ranging, and they form strong social bonds with other females. And again, Dr. Mitro said something, that even without being a mother or a wife, a female has a lot to contribute. And when we will go to the eusocial insects, we will see how the super sisters have a better evolutionary advantage than even the queen. So again, we are coming back to the alpha females and the African lioness, the orcas of the Northwest Pacific Ocean, the bonobo of Borneo, which are very close to humans, the African elephant, the mightiest of the land creatures, the spotted hyenas, the lemurs, and the wolves. They are all alpha female-led packs. Why do you think this has happened, whereas the humans have more or less universally seen a female subjugation? So again, I come back to what Professor Shane said at the beginning, that it has to be in space with time, the requirements of the species, and what makes a better leader, that even Dr. Mitro talked about, Ma Sharoda. So the leader has to be wiser, has to have a better vision for the overall betterment of the pack, which brings us to the concept of eusocial insects and the queen, which is the reigning caste. And we will be talking about caste. Caste is again something I heard my esteemed social scientists talk about. So this is the ant, the honeybee, wasp, and the termite. And eusociality has often been looked upon as an evolutionary paradox. Exactly why? Because all the while we've been talking about reproduction, mate selection, mothering, future generation, we will now see how the gene-centric evolution actually favors eusociality. So what is a eusociality or a eusocial colony? It is the highest level of organization where there is cooperative brood care, there are overlapping generations, there is division of labor into reproductive and non-reproductive groups. And in case you do not know, the workers of the colony are actually females who are non-reproductive. And one or two or maximum three females become reproductive because of the cumulative convergent endocrine signals from her non-reproductive sisters. And then we come to the concept of the specialized behavioral groups called the castes. At least one caste loses its ability to perform at least one behavior characteristic of individuals in another caste. So there is a clear division of labor. These are some of the examples of social species. The mole rats, these are shrimps, and we already know the examples from the insect world. This is a beetle. Now we come to the survival of the species. From here onwards, I'm going to talk about the role of the female and the future survivability of the clan, of the community, and of the species. So, human race, beware. Here, we see at the center is the colony size, which is the survival of the species, and the arrows which converge onto the box means it contributes to the colony size, and the colony size that contributes to the fitness of the colony and the fitness of the individuals in the colony. And you see the various factors, the division of labor, the worker body size variability, alate is the winged variety. Only certain of the members of the colony will become alate so that they can move elsewhere in search of resources should the colony need to grow in size. The homeostasis, the resilience, and we will talk about some of this also in context with the human species. So the polyandry and the polygyny or multiple mate selections is also a factor, and ultimately the worker lifespan that contributes to the colony size. And these are all females, mind you. This is slightly verbose, but I think it is important because this is data that we are going to discuss. And here we bring in the concept of super sisters. First, let us understand the concept of inclusive fitness theory, which means that an organism gains fitness not just by increasing its own reproductive output, but also via increasing reproductive output of other individuals that share their genes, especially their close relatives. So in haplodiploid species, haplo means one set of chromosomes, diploid is two sets of chromosomes. Haplodiploid species means some of the members have two sets of chromosomes and some of them have one set of chromosomes. So the females develop from fertilized eggs and have two sets of chromosomes, and the male develops from unfertilized eggs and have one set of chromosomes. Because a male is haploid, his daughters share 100% of his genes and 50% of their mothers. So then what happens? They share 75% of their genes with each other. And these are the super sisters, which are more related to their sisters than they would to their own offspring. So even though workers often do not reproduce, even though the females are not mothers, they can potentially pass on more of their genes by helping to raise their sisters than they would by having their own offsprings. Thus, this activity, which is often termed as an altruistic activity, but actually is not, because these super sisters are, quite sound of mind. They are not being unduly self-sacrificing, and they help raise the fitness of the entire colony. Now I will talk about a very sinister gene called the maternal gene and how it controls the fitness of the species. We have already talked about how the mother is very important. Now we will be talking about certain selfish genes that the mother carries in order to prepare its offsprings for any changes in the environment. And these adaptive maternal effects lead to phenotypic plasticity, that is the ability to respond to different environments by altering their phenotype. And in the process, so the mother not only affects her offsprings, but this entire phenomenon actually also contributes to the environment, as we shall see. In Drosophila, these are the nurse cells, these are the follicle cells and the oocytes. The oocyte undergoes meiosis and it is separated by a cytokinetic filament. So they kind of work independent of each other. And in this oocyte is the maternal effect, which is something that the mother passes on to the offspring through her cytoplasm. Earlier, we have seen the cytoplasmic determinants and the epigenome. So these are the messenger RNAs or the proteins that the mother passes on to the offspring that directly contributes to the size, the sex, or the behavior of the offspring, to the phenotype of offsprings that increase their fitness, and to phenotypic plasticity so that they are better able to cope with the changing environment. This is so important, these maternal effect factors called the morphogens, that they control the axis, the anterior-posterior axis, various important genes, and ultimately the development of the entire organism. So you see, all the offsprings are totally dependent on the homeotic genes of the mother. Here the box, the homeotic genes of the mother. In mollusca, uh, this is the dextral and this is the sinistral coiling. Why is the coiling needed? Because a deep sea mollusk needs to face the water current in such a way that it can optimally utilize the food resources. We see
Professor,
here, without going into details, yes?
yeah, Professor Banerjee, can you just summarize, because we'll come back to discussions again, which is very vital. I would like us to keep the time so that we can just come back
Summarizing
to
is
that.
slightly difficult. Let me
Okay,
quickly go through the
just
slides
yes,
and
fine.
end as
Yes,
quickly as I
yes,
can. So what I'm
yes, right.
trying to argue here is that the maternal genes have a special ability, for example, in birds, to pass on antibodies to the offspring. The plant, the mother plant, its own environmental condition affects the seed size, germination rate, and viability of the offsprings. So adaptive maternal effects are so important that the alate, the locusts from the innocuous grasshoppers are formed because of the maternal effect. And the maternal effect dominant embryonic arrest is a selfish gene which has been named after Medea, who had killed her own children because her husband was had cheated on her. So this is a gene that is carried in the insect, and the mother's Medea toxin kills the offsprings that do not carry that allele in it. So various factors, for the interest of time, this in fact can form a whole new lecture by itself. This is called social epigenomics. And these are grooming behavior seen in the mothers that have an effect through DNA methylation on the social dominance of the offsprings. The paternal genes also have a role to play. Female philopatry, these are the creatures, the baboon, the macaque, and the spotted hyena, which stay in a place and the males roam around, and they have a very complex social relationship. And this is very different from the free-ranging animals. They can often revert back to fully solitary forms. And this is comparable with the pastoral human communities where the females stay in one place, whereas the males move with the animals, versus the very urban agricultural community where the male-female divide is very fuzzy. So what genes are inherited from the mother? I have already said the most recent common ancestor. Does the dimorphism exclusively decide mate selection? No, as we see in certain creatures where I bring in the concept of a third and the fourth sex. Is there a biological positioning of the feminine traits? This would be my concluding slide for now. So the feminine traits, and this is what I refer, that Dr. Dotto Hajarika had asked, that whether the feminine traits of kindness, nurturing, morality, and virtue exist in the females of the animal kingdom. No. There are no rigid rules in the animal kingdom. For example, we find after weaning, the mother banishes the offspring from its territory. As long as the three cardinal goals are met with, there is the Medea gene that we have seen. Workers selflessly forego passing on its own gene. The nurse whales, elephants, and wolves in female-led packs are examples of apparently selfless behavior, but this is part of a very complex social hierarchy. So the decision-making power definitely should rest with the female, because it modulates, the females of the humans modulate the microenvironment. Immune resilience, as we know, less COVID kills women less than men. And this is the reason, because the X chromosome has a number of immune genes. This is the gender bias in viral entry. Are we progressing towards a universal genderless form for the human society, genderlessness, as we see in the moose, the antlers, various fish and shrimps, and in the blue-gilled yellow sunfish, I introduced the concept of more than two sexes. Yes, probably. Societal conditioning is more than the biological programming. The male and the female have more or less similar and yet different physiological traits. Why have we accepted this? There may be various arguments for it. One is status quo. One is maybe the Stockholm syndrome. One is, as I will show in the following slides, that probably there has been a parallel evolution. You know, women have not really bothered too much with the warfares and the quality of the male. Functional food, giving nutrition to the race, to the family, which is the smallest unit of the race, lies with the women. Traditional knowledge of water harvesting, of conservation, environment, Shita and Shokuntala, and finally the proponents of the Chipko movement uh, is a protector of the environment. Durga, who nurtures, and of course, a lady who destroys. The mitochondrial Eve. So we have all decided, we have all descended from that one common ancestor. And the last statement I would like to make is what Dr. Dotto Hazarika said in her introductory speech, that science from the Western concept, science and society, which is mainly from a very functional concept, but science and culture from a very feminine concept, are probably ideas that we need to discuss. I end my lecture with Rokeya Sakhawat Begum's Sultana's Dream, which talks about a feminist utopia where there are no gender binaries. And in very simple terms, we probably need to be unabashedly innovative, femininely assertive, and unapologetically ingenious. And we should celebrate the otherness. Probably that is where the solution to gender inequality lies, especially as the human race goes towards increased mechanization. And today with digitization and work from home, we are at the in the comfort of our homes, looking after our brood as well as ruling the world. So to preserve the natural environment for sustainable development, and especially for community medicine in times like this pandemic, which is steeped in culture and society, women being the guardians of traditional knowledge and being better evolved, probably are the determinants of the future of the human race. So last slide, whatever question we need to pose and the solution we seek must obey the natural order of things, which is what I have tried to elucidate in my lecture. And societal principle must be governed by natural laws to be sustainable. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Banerjee. That was an excellent presentation, extremely erudite, and we've just established what we set out to do. So from that sense, and I can't leave without mentioning this, whenever we think of scientists, we always have a problem of, how scientists lack the skill of communicating their fantastic lectures. And that is never again going to be my issue late and ever again, because this was just such a wonderful way of bringing science into the domain of people like, people who do not know the nitty-gritties of natural science. And this is what you have achieved in this, brought that so that all these categories, as you said, science would not have worked if you did not have the context to science, and society is the context where science is created. And so when we discuss these categories in society, we need science to reinforce those categories. So we can cry hoarse about equality of sexes, and until and unless you have a scientific basis and scientific determinism which says what you just told us here, the reality, and without that it really never make sense. Thank you so much. I'm very sorry we have really missed sort of exceeded our time limits, but I request our next participants to really allow this to have happened. We've had an excellent panel discussion so far, and now we get to the second level of our panel discussion. After this theoretical and grounded level of discussion that we've had, which has given a direction to how we are going to look at the differences of sex and how we're going to look at the differences of the social context of feminism, now we come to the actual grassroots, the grassroots expressions of how women have driven movements and how women have intervened. In the beginning, I was trying to talk, even Dr. Professor Banerjee has also mentioned about the Chipko movement, and there are a number of Northeast movements which have taken place, where women have actually taken to the streets and women have intervened in the most effective and active way, and taken this entire discourse of women's movement forward. So I will not waste any more time, and I would like to request the other participants to please keep within the time of 20 plus 5 minutes, 25 minutes. So we have a presentation now, Women in Liberation of Goa. Dr. Poulomi Aij Mukherjee is a director of Research Center and assistant professor of PG Department of History. I may have cut short with the introduction when I introduced your. That's because I was trying to save time, but all the detailed bio notes and abstracts are all available in our website, and for anyone who's interested, these esteemed panelists who've agreed to be with us here, their details and their work profile is all there in the IGNU website to be consulted. So Dr. Poulomi Aij Mukherjee, do you mind? I'm not reading any more of your
please don't do that.
Thank you very much. Just continue with your presentation, please. Yes.
Yes. Actually, thank you, Dr. Sujata Doctor. Actually, and the whole team of IGNU, Dr. Shiva Kumar, Dr. Vaumik, Dr. Mukherjee, and I can see Dr. Behra is listening to each and every presentation very attentively. And thank you, Dr. Kaustav. Thank you, Kaustav, also for helping us.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Yes, so I think another thing I just wanted to start by actually sharing my pleasure. I will try to share by myself. If there is any problem, I will tell you. Okay. So actually, it's really a pleasure to sharing this virtual platform with all this distinguished panelists, and I'm happy that I'm in between. So all the beautiful presentations already we had, and that is giving me a kind of and I'll be giving you a break because my presentation will be very short. I don't want to take Professor Shirupa's time, so I'll be, because I'm also eager to listen to her more. My thing a little, because it's more experience which I face as a student of, because when we study women's history, when we study the methods of women's history and how the studies are going on, as Professor Shoma Sen has rightly pointed out, that different kinds of generations, we studied their writings. They were classics to us. We try to follow them and reread and represent. We try to represent them again and again through our writings. So as a student of women's history, or as a student of history or human rights, there was a problem for us that if we follow the instructions, the path shown by all these stalwarts, but the context of their women's issues were completely different. What the colonial period had and the post-colonial period had, we are having now. So even now we are facing after the globalization, in a globalized world, women issues are changed drastically. They have changed drastically because, the colonial period and post-colonial, up to 1970s, almost legal, educational, political, economic, social rights has been expressed, and most of the cases it is granted by the constitutions of nations. But then when we face life experiences, when we try to read the gaps, the silences, there the problem lies. Because we have a tendency to follow, associate women's studies and women's histories either with subaltern group, or with this communist group, or with some human rights perspective, or with some economic perspective. So there are different perspectives are there, except our life experiences. We think that we are educated, We are coming from a particular class, caste, and society, and we are representing the whole society. So that is the problematic we have in our women's questions, which we are discussing about today. So I'm really thankful to Professor Shoma Shane when she was pointing out the transculturality. Along with transculturality, we have certain aspects of cross-culturality, cross-cultural theories also are there. We have cultural diversity perspective to understand women's history, and we have intercultural perspectives to understand women's history. In this case, today I'll be discussing the case of Goa, because we have to, when we are discussing post-colonialism, for me, Goa comes first because Goa actually had one of the most oldest colonial settlement of the European settlement. So when we discuss about our freedom struggle, liberation of our country, sometimes I think there is I don't know for what reason, there are different reasons not to include Goa in it. So when I was working with one of the project sanctioned by Indian Council for Historical Research regarding the liberation of Goa, I was going through the documents, then I found that there is no mention of women participants, women freedom fighters. And we don't find any list, because there are volumes of list published by different organizations about the list of freedom fighters. So volumes are there. But in that, it's very difficult to get a reference of women, get any single reference of women freedom fighters. So that actually prompted me to look into the police files, look into the tribunal files. From there, I could find out total 33 women from that office files. So 33 women there, and I could collect some data regarding their contribution, their background related to this. So that was my work I have done. So here I just want to show you the list which I have created, those women, their file photographs also I collected, and I created a small biography for all of them, their education background, their family background, their social background, and caste background. All those things were incorporated just to make a small monograph of it. So that was my work. I don't know I'll be able to share it with you or not, that list. But before that, I just wanted to share the gender profile of Goa. Because gender profile of Goa, let me see, I just able to do it or not. Yes.
Do you need some help from Costa?
Let me see.
Okay.
I think Costa, you help me. It's not coming.
Okay, madam.
Ah.
Then what should I start? PPT or you sent one?
The PPT first. The PPT first.
Okay.
So there actually we will be discussing about the gender profile of Goa in colonial period, then post-colonial period. Post-colonial here meaning about actually Portuguese post-colonial initiatives. So you will be surprised to know that we always talk about British reforms, but the Portuguese reforms are very important because they started in 16th century. And you can see the abolition of sati is coming up with the Afonso de Albuquerque when he is talking about the decree of having marriage. So registration of marriage started during 16th century. So registration, who will be the inheritors, what will be the status of the citizens. So these things were actually explained in 16th century Portuguese legal reforms which they are implementing in Goa. So that is very surprising. And another important thing that regarding they had a specific civil code. So that civil code is still existing there. So in civil code, you can understand that their class, caste, religion, everything is defined, and who will enjoy what. The inheritance rights are clearly defined even today. So that is the benefit of, and that's why, the profile, the gender profile of Goa is really better even today compared to other states. It comes in the fourth position compared to other gender ratios. After Kerala, Mizoram, it's coming after that. So it's one of the regarding gender ratio, the report is there always, that National Commission for Women, they are publishing it. So if you want to see the report, you can definitely search it. You will get the PDF of it. There, if you read, you can understand that why we have to learn about Goa. So I think I don't know he'll be able to open it. So I just continue. So regarding Sati, oh, thank you so much, Kaustubh. Thank you. Okay.
Madam.
So this is the pre-colonial period I just wanted to show, and these are the documents. These are the sources I am getting, because I know the Portuguese language, so I could read them, and that's why that Jesuit accounts are there. I think Dr. Shobha Chaudhary will be knowing that from the Goethals Library. There are also some of the documents we can get from there. So because Jesuits accounts, we are getting Pietro della Velle's account, 1623. We are getting Tume Pires Summa Oriental, and there are archaeological evidences regarding Sati, existence of Sati, because multiple number of Sati stones you can find all over Goa. So these are the references from which we are getting pre-colonial idea of pre-colonial Goa. Like any other part of India, all these documents, they are mentioning about the patriarchal system, the problems of Sati, Daudi, Parda, because these are all European writings, and they are mentioning the way they are seeing the Indian context, they are mentioning about it. So all these problems and vices of patriarchy we can get from there, all these documents. Child marriage is there, female infanticide is there, and education problems were there. So now, just now I was talking about Portuguese reforms. Yes, you can go to next one, Kaustubh. Next one. So I was talking about Portuguese reform. I mentioned 1510 Alfonso Albuquerque. He started this thing, and the last one, Kaustubh. Last one.
Last one. This one.
Yes. No. Previous one. This one. Yes. So ban on Sati was recorded with the Afonso de Albuquerque. Then we are getting reforms. We are getting code different codes are there. Then educational reforms are coming with different decrees. So, Kaustubh, next one. Yes. So the Civil Code of 1867, widow remarriage were promoted in 1684 onwards. These are all actually Portuguese reforms taken by the Portuguese government. And education, regarding women's education, they have taken 1841, 46, 54, 69, 87, and 1911. We are doing different reforms, starting from the primary level school education, and girls' schools were established, girls' colleges were established, and they are promoting women's education from 1841. The first women's college was established in, women's school was established in Goa, and in different estates like Salsette in Goa, in some of the other areas, Daman, Diu, we are getting establishment of girls' schools. All the colonies related to Portuguese, we are getting girls' schools. We are getting different language institutes. We are getting nursing schools. We are getting B.Ed schools, and we are getting colleges. Even finally, university is also coming up. Next one. So now I think we can see the impact of the Western education on Goa. Western education means as I said, the medium of teaching everything was Portuguese. So Here, Western education, we mentioned, it is actually Portuguese education. So with that, they are also getting, just like any other part of India, they are getting connected with rationalism, humanism, liberalism, secularism. Progressive legislations are coming in 19th and 20th century, which is giving them a brighter legal future. Even today, if you see the court cases, women are filing more cases compared to any other states. So even we can see we can only compare it with Kerala. So this kind of gender report you can see from that. I think that is the background of that Western kind of education they are getting. Second phase, they are getting the concept of satyagraha, the concept of independence movement. For them, liberation of India becomes a tool for their own liberation. They took it identical. They took it as a tool to liberate themselves, to participate in processions, to participate in rallies, to give beautiful speeches. We have the documents where they are giving speeches in Portuguese, because they are saying that because some of the speeches we have mentions that they are saying that Jai Hind is such a slogan for us, as you say, Jai Salazar. Okay, so long live Salazar. So these kind of interesting concepts and these kind of interesting writings we are getting from the freedom fighters of Goa, and they are going to jail. They are facing tortures, and they are participating even in revolutionary activities also. Not only with this non-violence of Gandhi, they are participating in revolutionary movements also, because Lohia was one of the most important key person. He actually influenced these Goan women a lot. So they used to participate, and any one of these women used to get arrested. All of them will come together. We were talking about team spirit. So all of them will come together and fight, and just will make a gherav in the police station. So these kind of incidents are explained when you discuss, when you talk to them. You get the direct experiences of them. But when I started, many of them, 60% of them were not living. But some of them with whom I talked to, I have the recorded things. They were fascinating. They were saying that actually freedom, liberation of Goa was actually liberation of us. And the inheritance rights, the selection of women, the marriage, bigamy was a very important aspect in Goa. If you see, there was legally bigamy was not allowed, because legally by 17th century they are saying that monogamy should be practiced. So because Portuguese government, they were Catholic, they are staunch Catholic, they are promoting that you have to follow monogamy. You cannot go for this kind of marrying more than people, but they are giving exceptions also. Exceptional, if you read the legal documents, you can see there are exceptions. These are the exceptions on which you can go for a second marriage, but you have to practice monogamy. So these kind of approaches. So bigamy was a problem of Goan women. So that also they fought, and they became more empowered by participating in rallies, as I was telling, that rallying and uttering slogan, processions, conducting processions, even flag hoisting, and getting arrested by people. They were put into jail many times. Next one. So, I think now, actually, Women Freedom Fighters of Goa, I wanted to show you the list. I think, but now I think also we can show the list. I sent one PDF of list.
Okay, just 1 minute.
Yes. I just incorporated the list. I have not incorporated the small biographies, because I know that time will be limited. So I will just go through. I think I just want to, if he can show it to you. So with that list, then I think I just want, in my next portion, actually I wanted to conclude by highlighting some of the methodological things we need to keep in mind when we try to highlight the silences in history. So what will be the methodologies? So I think I wanted to conclude after showing this list. I will be showing you that what were my idea. First thing I think I face, we have to follow a diversity model. If we follow that only one kind of model, particularly in Indian context, So it is somewhere we are making some mistakes. Okay, so these are actually 33 people and their photograph I could find from the lost files, and they were not ready to give me, but anyway I said that I am walking about liberation of Goa. So it is, and now because because of regionalism, Marathi regionalism is very strong. So they don't want us to disclose all these issues and highlight particularly Portuguese documents, Portuguese. If you go to the central library, they are very, very friendly. They will give you all the documents, but these documents are not there in central library. So you have to go to the police files. You have to go to state archives. So there it was very difficult to find. Somehow I could collect all these 33 women's photographs with a small, I think somewhere I got some 2-3 lines. Then I could get, I contacted their relatives, and from there I collected some of the materials related to it. Okay. So I think of course it's fine. I think they could understand what it is. So can you go back to my slide now?
Okay, just a moment.
Yes, yes. Thank you for your cooperation. Now it's working fine with me. Professor Shoma, you face problems, but it's going fine with me. Okay, thank you. Yes, next one.
Just 1 minute.
Yeah. Okay, so the methods adopted in this case, I just wanted to point out, it's traditional and contemporary, both methods we have to use. So whenever we do women's history, I think we have to combine both traditional methods and contemporary methods. Sometimes it is called as combined methods in some of the writings. So traverse traditional divides and helpful for capitalization of the best of both traditions. Another thing that qualitative and quantitative both always we are mentioning when we talk about methodology. So we have to combine both. Next one, Kostu. Yes. So as I was talking about equality and diversity, these two are the key factor for women's research in post-colonial and post-globalized world. So we have to follow these two things, then only we'll get something out of it. Because if you are going to interview a Dalit group and you are showing yourself that I know, because already you know everything about them, you just want to get some data. So then they will give you the real data. So in my case, you all are experts, you know that. So what I'm just sharing my own experience, which I face, because if you say that I'm coming from government, through government reference I'm coming, they will not open up. So if you go by a government vehicle, they will not talk to you. So if you are going, because in my case, I look very simple. So I will take a jhola and I will carry on. I will go there. Then they will speak so many things. Even some of them, they will cry and they will open up themselves. All the old women, they were so happy that somebody is coming and asking about their experiences. So this actually made me very emotional, and helped me to go ahead with this. Next one. Diversity, I already explained. I think you can, next one. Yes. So in conclusion, I may say that distinct dynamics we have to develop. It should be more participatory, more experiential and diverse, and centered in and around society and culture. Scholars are encouraged to view their peers as additional sources of knowledge. Without our peers and their paths, we cannot move ahead. But I think we have to associate ourselves with the present condition, the contemporary problems. Then only some new vision, as Dr. Doctor was mentioning in the beginning, that new language or new vision, new methodology, it could be developed. Because if we, at the same time, if we give importance to participatory, experiential and diverse approaches, so that is very much important. A critical approach to knowledge rather than a common set of facts typically share a commitment to grounding the investigations within interdisciplinary frameworks. Diversity is the heart of the current intellectual agenda. That I think Professor Shoma also explained in the morning. And next slide. Posit an alternative to the single notion of men. So in this case, I just wanted to mention that Dr. Dautu was mentioning in the morning that all women panel. But we have you see the position, you had 4 men, you are the only woman when you are representing. So if from the brochure we can see, from the brochure you can see you are representing only woman, and Dr. Behra is there. So I just wanted to say that. So, and I think we need more this kind of all women forums, because so that we can express, and then we record it and show it to our male counterparts. And another aspect, I was so fascinated with Professor Ena's presentation. It was actually, that can be a very important tool for parenting, because whenever I think about parenting, not male, not women, we are always parenting, giving them, don't do this, don't do that, you have to cover yourself, don't go out without, you have to tell, always call. So we are telling this to our girls. But I think the way Professor Ena emphasized on the root of womanhood, the root of female genome. So I think we should teach our boy children with this thing, with that scientific approach. So parenting is the only another important method by which we can promote this kind of women, because that's why I was mentioning about this male participation, because with this kind of discussion, we can explore the aspects of, and the scientific approaches are really very, very interesting, because whatever we are trying to explain as social science students, and she is actually giving, she has already given that the natural selection, the natural science. So confidence to improve things, not only for themselves, but for others. So the team, I think Dr. Arpita mentioned about the team, so group. So this is also important, but with individuality. With individuality, we should not forget the individual problems, because as women we know that each one of us, we are having individual problems, individual issues. Because I teach in a women's college, I know the problems we are facing. I'm in Kerala, then also you can't even imagine the problems faced by women here. So transformation of the sense of empowerment into citizen action. So there the nationalistic cause comes. So for nation, for our contribution, for our, including our family. So it starts with the family and ends with nation. So these aspects we have to explore. So the next one. It's almost over, Dr. Dotto.
I'm very sorry about.
So this is my concluding points I wanted to highlight. Linking the intellectual and the experiential, that is the key for today's research in women's history, and that connecting the traditional knowledge, as I said, creating personalized learning is also another important point. Incorporate new knowledge into lifestyle, and it should be related to the research culture on trust and mutual respect. That is also important. So thank you so much. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Aich, for that fantastic presentation and that piece of history which you have revived, and you did not allow this to leave us. This is there, and we know that it's safe in the hands of the historians now. Now, in fact, what I would like to tell you is this topic for the webinar was almost a coincidence, because the original topic was was actually, which I had discussed with I think in the initial point we had discussed that this webinar is going to be on the role of women in the Indian independence movement. And when I went looking and searching for data and work and things, the kind of vacuum that was revealed to me, they said that we really don't know, there's not much research going on, people are not aware of. So it was shocking that we will actually meet a vacuum when it comes to unearthing data, historical data on these women revolutionaries. In Bengal, I couldn't manage. I don't know all over India what is the status, but in Bengal, when I went to the universities, different universities, history departments, I said, what is the kind of, is it not impressive at all? We cannot. I said, do you know about the Chittagong Armory? No, nothing impressive. So it is so refreshing to see what what you have done, and I wish that more and more research was taken up by this. And another thing that I'm just taking undue advantage of my position out here, but I just want to say this, which I hope it doesn't get lost somewhere. What you just pointed out, we also need to take into account these contradictions which are figuring out. You said you are from Kerala and a highly educated, literate, women centric society, in that sense, very high literacy rate, yet Kerala is coming up with some unusual set of problems for thing, and these are contradictions that needs to be identified in different. This is not really the trend which would be predicted, right? But why this is happening? So I think we need to be aware of all these kind of nuances that you're talking about. Now we'll go on to the next very, very interesting presentation by. Yes. So here we are, Professor Shrirupa Prasad, Associate Professor at the University of Missouri, Columbia. And again, I'm cutting short her very acclaimed bio note out here. So she will be talking to us about her book, which is on cultural politics of hygiene in late colonial India. And this is so interesting, even some things which are so personal and so personalized can actually find a space in the public domain, and we then form the base of further policies and things like that. So Professor Prasad, would you please take over? Sure.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, now we can.
I would like to
can I request everyone to put your mic on mute, please?
I would like to thank the IGNOU Regional Center, Professor Sujata, Dr. Hazarika, and postdoc for organizing and managing this panel. What I decided to do is I will read a little section from my book. I am refraining from making any kind of prescriptions about what kind of solutions could be there to some of the problems and issues faced by women today, or what kind of language do we need to address the women's question. What I decided, on the contrary, is that I just talk about this little bit of history, about a woman's writings in the 19th century, kind of mid 19th century, who was the most important identity for her was that she was a wife and a mother, but she also had this deep passion about what did it mean for her, and what can we then think about a broader ethic of care when we talk about a kind of a feminist ethic of care, when we talk about women's lives which are not in any way part of kind of the official history, who have been largely invisible from the dominant histories, and how can those lives be reflected upon? So before going into that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this book that I had written that came out in 2015. This is basically a cultural history of hygiene during the kind of late 19th and early 20th century. And what I wanted to look at was the intertwined histories of hygiene and domesticity, and how that discourse of hygiene, care, and feminism, discourses of hygiene, care, and feminism, related to the two most important sites that were debated during the 19th century and early 20th century discourses of social reform. One was the home, the domestic sphere, or what Parthak has called, or feminist historians have called the private sphere. And the other was that of the public sphere, the nation. So I wanted to look at how that realm, how that space evolved in between the 1890s and 1940s. So what I do is, one of the chapters is on women's writings. Some women who were a little more well-known than others, but predominantly these were women, educated. Some were educated, most were not. Some of them, majority of them, got married very early, had several children. Some of the children died, which was a very, very common thing of, for children, a lot of children who die in the very early ages. And some of these women spent their entire lives within the homes. But from those spaces, I mean, you can call them confined, but from those spaces, they dreamt about, they imagined, they read about, and they wrote about a number of possibilities, potential. And we can, of course, debate about to what extent these were feminist imaginaries and feminist, politics, instance of feminist politics. But they definitely tried to break some of the constraints their lives were in. So I wanted to read about the life and writings of this woman, and what her life was, and how did she look at her life, and contemporary Bengali, rural Bengali society, and what did her life mean to her, and what did she do to make that life meaningful. We might not find that life meaningful, but she did from the confines and constraints of her life. I'm sorry, sometimes my glass is getting so fogged, so please, I apologize for this. So let me read that. So care was a central concern in the medical debates of the early 20th century. Debates on the emergence of nursing as a profession, which included contentious discussions over what constituted modern nursing, translated care into a larger social and moral ethic at this time. This chapter, from which I'm reading, this chapter examines Bengali women's autobiographical writings to highlight the entwined emergence and enforcement of care as a modern medical practice, and care as a social and moral principle. While care's role as a centerpiece of modern medicine is well acknowledged, its constituent role in the affective history of hygiene is less so. The ethic of care, as I show in this chapter, was a defensive response to the fear of contagion. And it's funny that it's very timely that I'm talking of contagion. And by contagion, we don't only mean it in the way we understand in terms of, in terms of kind of the medical understanding, but contagion as social and moral contagion. And it's easy to see how social and moral contagion play a very important part in any kind of epidemic or pandemic. It's no less powerful than the kind of the biological or microbiological kind of contagion that we scientists talk about. Care as an affective offshoot of contagion was produced in another significant way. In the writings that I examined, contagion represented the spread of social ills, and as such, symbolized the decay of social and moral fabric. Women often wrote about afflictions, such as lack of education among women and child marriage, which they argued doomed women's social standing and led to a severe dearth of maternity provisions for women, which in turn led to the loss of lives of mothers and their newborn children. These afflictions collectively signified lives of limitless suffering for Bengali women and Indian women during that time that needed care and attention. Care, apart from immediate concerns with health, that thus encompassed a number of intertwined objectives. It was framed as an ideology aimed at social and physical transformation. It also represents a political gesturing to justify, albeit implicitly, women's increasing presence in the public sphere. And finally, care was a moral response, which, while critical of a patriarchal society and nation, emphasized the elevated morality that women could claim as a collectivity. So that's kind of the introduction to this particular chapter. And I am now going to just read from the section, which is basically a memoir by a middle-class Bengali woman by the name of Priyobala Gupta. So what this talk focuses on, that how our notions of suffering and an ethic of care are intertwined in Priyobala Gupta's memoir. Shriti Manjusha, The Treasure House of Memories, a compilation of Priyobala Gupta's writings, is one of a large number of stories, memoirs, and autobiographies in Bengali by 19th and 20th century women writers that have been recently compiled, edited by the Women's Studies Department in Jadavpur University. These compilations are an archival treasure trove of women's writings that explore the meanings and value this time had for these women, the challenges they faced, and the spirit with which they attempted to overcome some of these challenges. Just a second. The editor for these collections on women's writings, Yashodhara Bakshi, in the preface of Shriti Manjusha writes, Priyobala Gupta never became famous. However, she was revered within her family and her village for her knowledge and humanitarianism. Although Gupta suffered from anxieties as a result of her father's traveling career during her childhood, this was also a happy time because Gupta could pursue her studies. The school signified an expanding world of knowledge despite the 1,000 barriers she faced. However, her family's concern with her marriage when she was just 13 years old dramatically changed her life. For Priyobala, the biggest tragedy of her life was when her education was discontinued in consideration of her marriage prospects. She writes, I used to dream, Priyobala Gupta writes in her autobiography, that after my marriage I would enter a world full of bliss and would be able to pursue my studies. But she says, I could not find their slightest trace in reality. So much of desire I had harbored. I could not tell anyone here what a great blow it was to my dreams. Who would even understand? Trying to explain to someone would have brought a bigger trouble. Moreover, I was too young to explain to others or follow a path of my choosing. She harbored a deep hurt all her life against her father, who once had encouraged her to study and develop her poetic abilities, but changed completely once she was of marriageable age. Gupta's life experiences in a significant way were in stark contrast to those of Sukhalata Rao, though both had to confront gendered and patriarchal practices. Nevertheless, Gupta did not give up. Her experiences left a deep impact on her, and he realized that the fundamental cause behind all this, especially those which constrained women, was upper caste and upper class Hindu conservatism. She did not abandon reading and writing. Her poetic accomplishments, promotion of education for women, and commitment to helping and educating women the correct lessons of maternal care within the material and ideological constraints of everyday life made her exceptional. Lack of literacy, poor sanitary conditions, and the horror of the Aturghar in her village troubled her. She learned midwifery and used her skills to positively transform the infant mortality situation in her own village. Interestingly, while transitioning into married life caused the biggest disruption in her life, because she had to leave her studies, she perceptively and also poignantly interwove her own experiences with the tumultuous political climate of the time, particularly the Swadeshi movement. She writes, I soon arrived at my marriageable age and my studies came to a stop. This was also the time of Swadeshi. The revolutionary time had sounded its war bugle and the skies and air of Bengal breathed fire. Names like Khudiram, Profullo Chaki were chanted even by the children of Bengal. There was tremendous excitement in the hearts of the people of Bengal. Everywhere there were meetings and arrests, death by hanging, bonfires of foreign textiles. Irishe Ashin, the day of token stoppage of all domestic cooking. Raksha Bandhan and singing Swadeshi songs.
Shrupa, we missed out a little bit. Will you just, we missed out a little bit?
Okay. Okay, now.
Just,
okay,
just a little bit.
Okay. There was tremendous excitement in the hearts of the people of Bengal. Everywhere there were meetings and arrests, deaths by hanging, bonfires of foreign textiles. 30 Tirishe Ashi, the day of token stoppage of all domestic cooking. Raksha Bandhan and singing Swadeshi songs. Caught in the midst of all this ferment, my studies were swept aside like a small twig in a frothing stream. The abrupt interruption in Gupta's studies and the historical conjuncture at which it happened became the context for Kriti experiences also provides a critique of patriarchal customs amongst upper caste Hindus. What she found most interesting was that despite there being zamindars, the village of her father-in-law was deeply backward, which was, very, very common that time. That most residents of this village were uneducated, were burdened by superstitions, she wrote. Her disdain for many of the customs followed by her new family is starkly evident. She fell out of place, moving in an environment where women still did not wear a chemise regularly, and she was ridiculed frequently for wearing one. This particular concern, however, was a part of a broader disappointment that she felt in living in a world without education, a world in which she and many others like her was not even allowed to pursue education. She's writing, neighbor wives and girls would come for a chat. They would leave soon with a polite goodbye. I would invite them to come again, but there was no genuine eagerness. My true companions in all these times were the books I owned. Kabbo Kushumanjali, Konokonjali and Arjunari, volumes 1 and 2. My eyes would often fill up with tears when I realized that I was surrounded by abysmal darkness. Where was light? There were plenty of books here, but I still lacked the courage to ask, what if they were offended? The only thing that occupied me was how to take time out so that I could read. If one had to highlight the effective emotional and moral centerpieces of Gupta's life, it undoubtedly would be a combination of her anguish, distress, and sadness, her pleasure in education, and her single-minded passion for being able to read and write. Tonika has remarked how Rashundari Devi Sharjivan lacks the concrete and the sensuous dimensions of everyday life. As far as Sritimunisha is concerned, Priyabala Gupta similarly avoided in a detailed narrative of her household life. And this is a very interesting thing that is seen repeatedly in women's writings, especially after her marriage. And whenever she did engage with everyday living, it was mostly to offer a critical commentary on patriarchal customs and practice and the abject situation of women. The two causes which Priyabala Gupta had immersed herself were women's education and maternal health. These endeavors began when some young women from the village came to her for help in composing personal letters. I used to feel bad. Why don't you learn to read and write? You can then express your own thoughts yourself, she would say. But when these women asked her, who would teach us to read and write? It gave her the reason to finally give shape to her commitment to women's education, which she considered foundational for women's rights. She writes, I'm just picking up some, sections. For a long time, I harbored a deeply critical stance towards care for the mother and the new child. The village Aturghar, what a nightmarish place that used to be. To this day, I search for an appropriate word to describe its inhumanity. When I think of those terrible days of my life, I wonder how I survived those ordeals. The suffering that I endured at the hands of untrained midwives from the time of my pregnancy till my child was delivered would forever be etched in my memory. Priyabala Gupta's critique of what she deemed archaic and brutal birthing practices and care of the newborn was evident here, quite blunt. Her understanding of care as a moral and social practice needs to be located within this context. Not unlike the start of her engagement with women's education, her tryst with midwifery started when she had to attend a child's delivery alone. From then on, she trained herself as a midwife and used to regularly attend complicated deliveries that could have jeopardized the lives of many women. It is also important to note a paradox at the heart of Priyabala Gupta's ethic of care. On the one hand, experiences of the pain and suffering of women, particularly during childbirth, connected her with other women in the village. However, on the other hand, her condemnation for Kobiraji or Ayurvedic medicine reflected a class-specific and modern sensibility that judged all Ayurvedic medicine and its practitioners to be regressive and outdated. She searched for a meaningful life as she confronted everyday domesticity, consisting of obsolete customs and a living that was bereft of what she considered the greatest pleasure, namely education and learning. In this sense, Shriti Manjusha was very much an endeavor that had the pursuit of self-authentication and self-fulfillment at its core. She measured her life and desires in relation to a community of women with whom she felt kinship of suffering. But she also knew that she would remain an outsider within this group until she could bring these women into the folds of her life's calling. Here, the search for a purposeful life and writing about it merged with each other, and Sriti Manjusha became the embodiment of that pursuit. In conclusion, in Sriti Manjusha Gupta narrated spaces as contagion. Her reminiscences are full of meditation on spaces and places, most of which are described as dark, unsanitary, constrained, and suffocating. The domestic as well as the village signified spaces that were in need of transformation because they stifled the desires of women and did not offer healthy possibilities. The aspects that characterize her narratives of home are in particular very different from that of Shukalata Rao's memories of her own home, which I showed earlier were filled with wonderment and nostalgia. Sriti Manjusha is mostly about Priyabala Gupta's life after marriage, her new social realities, her miseries and frustrations, and finally her struggles and successes with regard to women's health and education. She was often full of despair in her experiences of living and writing about these spaces. Against this gloomy and dissenting portrayal of house and home, one has to appreciate Priyabala Gupta's to appropriate
Shrupa, you
yes. Can
towards
you hear me?
towards the end we lost you, but I think you may have to just summarize now a little bit, so we can keep up to the time.
Where did you? What was the last thing that you heard? Where did I lose you all?
We just
Maybe
just
just the last sentence.
just the last sentence. Just the last sentence.
Okay,
Last couple of sentences, yeah.
Okay, sure. Just a second. Okay. The aspects that characterize her narratives of home in particular are very different from somebody like Shukalata Rao, who was the aunt of, the noted filmmaker Satyajit Ray. It's very different from somebody like Shukalata Rao's memoirs of her own home, which I showed earlier were filled with wonderment and nostalgia. Sriti Manjusha was mostly about Priyabala Gupta's life after marriage, her new social realities, her miseries and frustrations, and finally her struggles and successes with regard to women's health and education. She was often full of despair in her experiences of living and writing about those spaces. Against this gloomy and dissenting portrayal of house and home, one has to appreciate Priyabala Gupta's memoir against this gloomy and dissenting portrayal of house and home, one has to appreciate Priyabala Gupta. To appropriate a phrase that historian Antoinette Burton uses more broadly as the quest story. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Prasad. Somehow these presentations have been so fantastic in terms of reiterating, each presentation came as though it was meant to come right after that, and it was meant to just reiterate just the trend that we began with. So I'm very, very sorry that we have, I think we've kind of messed up with the time completely, and I don't know how to mend this right now, because I was hoping that we're going to have a long discussion and there are going to be a lot of issues, and we are all dying to talk so many things, issues that we want to counter exchange with each other, but I don't know whether that's going to be possible. It will all depend on how we take it in agreeable with every panelist out here. So now this brings us to, it's the last but not the least, and it is wonderful because it is again going to reiterate exactly what we are, the trend that we have set here, and we have evolving a new language of protest, women in the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, which is so contemporary and so important and relevant today to reflect on how exactly citizenship defines women. So we have Dr. Shoma Chaudhary Lahiri. She's teaching sociology at the St. Xavier's College, Kolkata, autonomous, the actual St. Xavier's College, yes. And a lot of known, I can see that thing. And she has taught in the University of Pune, and of course, shortly in Jadavpur University. I will not, without wasting much time, Dr. Chaudhary, would you please take on? Shoma.
Okay, sorry. I won't take much of your time. I know that you've been listening to long and very interesting presentations, and I have learned a lot from each of the presentations. Thank you so much, esteemed panelists. I want to begin by thanking Dr. Shivakumar and Dr. Sujata Datto Hajarika for asking me to speak in this occasion. This is an exploratory kind of a study. I have been trying to collect narratives of women and students who participated in the anti-citizenship Amendment Act movement against the Amendment Act movement in Park Circus primarily, but due to the pandemic, it has been a little difficult. But I'll try and present before you what I find and how, also from published reports and articles and newspaper reports primarily, and these narratives, I'll try and present what I have found to argue whether we can think of a new kind of language for the for not only academicians but also for feminist activists, and see whether there is something that we can learn from the forms of participation that we have witnessed in our own city and in different cities. Now the thing is, I will try and I don't have um, PowerPoint slides. So I've just sort of tried and structured my presentation in 4 sections. One is I'll talk a little bit about the Anti-Citizenship Amendment Act very briefly, and then I'll talk about the nature of the protests, and then I'll talk about whether there have been continuities with the women's movement. There is a very thriving, a very vibrant women's movement with a long history. So whether there are any continuities with that, and what can we learn from this protest? And I'll wind up after that. Now the thing is, you all know that the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019 offers citizenship to all Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, Sikhs, Christians and Parsis who came to India before December 31st, 2014 from the neighboring countries of Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, due to religious persecution. Now, this element of religious persecution has been is a dimension of the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019. Now, what sparked off a lot of protest in our country is the pointed omission of Muslims from the CAA, and the fact that kind of a faith-based criterion was introduced in sort of deciding aspects of citizenship, thereby violating the secular basis of our Indian Constitution. Now, I don't want to claim that neither do the people who participated in the movement claim that this was a feminist protest. Okay, it was a protest by Muslim women, by students, by political activists, by of different persuasions, of left, of independent orientation, researchers. But, it was a protest which attracted the attention of a wide variety of people for different reasons. So it's not, the participants don't claim that it is a feminist protest. However, there was something that was common to the understanding of the CAA, was that the act is said to be embedded in the larger project of ethno-nationalism and the process of implementing National Register for Citizens, whereby the documents of ancestors would be required to be registered as Indian citizens. So the whole protest was organized against this binary of outsiders and infiltrators, which we have seen that when the NRC in Assam was conducted, a large number of people, lakhs of people, in fact, a majority of whom were Hindus, have been disenfranchised because of this particular dimension, that they could not produce their ancestry documents. Now, as I have just told you, that the Citizenship Amendment Act and protests around it were not an issue of the Muslims alone. There were people across class who said that they would find it very difficult to produce documents because they have either moved from their place of origin, they have either lost those documents, they have to procure new documents. The process itself is very alienating. In some cases, for older people who grew old at that time, these documents were less likely to be required. Therefore, obtaining papers is a challenge. Okay, so the thing is, it's not only a protest whereby the Muslim women were concerned, but what was remarkable was that Muslim women students came out in large numbers. Among these students, there were people who were non-Muslims, who were people of who came from intercultural background, who parents have had intercaste marriages, who who believed in different religions, but the important thing is that the nature of protest was something that is something that we need to recognize, and these were primarily non-violent in nature. They were reminiscent of the idea of satyagraha, wherein a large number of people were drawn in, but which made it very difficult for the state to initiate any kind of violence, especially in places like Shaheen Bagh and Park Circus, etc., because they were primarily non-violent. In other places also they were non-violent, but because of the larger political climate, it became very difficult for the state to there were threats. There was this impending notion of violence, but it became very, there was no, in parts of Uttar Pradesh, people did indulge in violence against women who were occupying spaces. But in the context of our city, that is Kolkata, it was very unique that a number of people came out to protest. Now, what was this specific aspect about the Muslim women that I want to talk about? Now, Muslim, it is generally in academic writing as well as a commonsensical understanding that Muslim women do not come out. Muslim women generally do not express themselves. They are not politically active. They will not congregate as others would congregate very spontaneously. That Muslim women need saving. That is the commonsensical understanding, that they need to be represented. They need to be represented by their own men. That is the commonsensical understanding that is prevalent amongst communities. The fact that Muslim women of older generation, of our generation, of generation even younger than ours, even brought in their children and participated in large numbers, it sort of challenges this notion of the fact that Muslim women do not participate. Now, when you ask the participants about this dimension, that why don't Muslim women come out? They say that Muslim women do come out. Please look at the class configuration. Muslim women also have to earn. So if you look at the poor amongst the Muslim women, they do go out on a regular basis. They work, they just as they work in the domestic field as domestic helps, they do go out. So it's wrong to allege that Muslim women don't speak. Muslim women have also been involved in a lot of social service, a lot of community service, a lot of study circles. They may not be very overtly politically active in political parties, but there are other avenues of participation of Muslim women that have come to light following these protests. One of the though Shaheen Bagh in Delhi became the face of the struggle, one of the important aspect of the protest, which shattered the myth about Muslim communities, is that when people ask them, and this has been published as a report, as a newspaper report, that when people ask them, "आप यहाँ क्यों आए हैं? Why have you come?" They said that ये हमारे मुल्क की बात है. This is a matter of our nation, right? So this was a very significant aspect of their participation, of the reasons for their participation. They might have come out because they were angry. They might have come out because they were anxious. They might have come out because they were pushed. But many Muslim women said that they came out because it was a matter of, it gave them a sense of belonging. I'll quote one or two things that they said. But as these women came out, they rallied behind each other, they supported each other, they raised their voices to be counted as citizens, thus making these protests a moment of empowerment and liberation for themselves and others. Now, one of the other important aspect which acted as a spur, which gave them the relevant push for participating in this particular movement, is that in the beating up of students, the attack on students in universities such as Jamia Millia and JNU, that pushed many Muslim women to come out. So the public face of these protests were grandmothers, were wives, mothers, sisters, protesting, bringing their children to these protests and melding their private and public responsibilities as women. And I quote a woman from Kolkata's Hatibagan area, Nuzhat Parveen, who says, "It's a very different feeling. As Muslim women, we stayed at home, maybe sometime talked to our neighbors. Now we have come out, we have met Hindus, Sikhs, Punjabis. We all think the same way. We have found unity." Close quotes. So in their role as mothers and caretakers, they experienced a kind of an existential kind of a crisis, and they wanted to be, or they rather became, caretakers of real people, their children, their relatives, their neighbors. Now, this is a kind of a repeated pattern of using religious identities and practices as tools of kinship. Now, another important distinctive aspect of this particular movement was that thousands of Muslim people, or even people who participated in park circus, they simultaneously held up the Indian national flag and they chanted Allahu Akbar while demonstrating for a secular India. Now, these public deployments of religious symbols that are normally considered to be part of the private sphere or part of the community-based organizing are now new tools of protests against assaults on citizenship. Now, these are mostly first-time protesters. Most of the people I've spoken to are first-time protesters. They were simultaneously building community. They were asserting their citizenship in public places. And also another dimension of the protest was that they were sharing food. They were sharing food and tea as common practice, which is, reminiscent of independence organizing by women during the time of independence. The same kind of practices of building community was witnessed in these kinds of protests. Again, there were interfaith services. Sikhs, Christians, Hindus, Muslims, they prayed collectively. And they wore the markers of their religion to show their solidarity. So they read the preamble to the Indian Constitution. They repeatedly sang the national anthem. They evoked Ambedkar, the father of India's constitution. And they also said that the doors were open for Dalits and non-Dalits to support their cause. right? So many a times they were castigated by others, by people of political persuasion, who claimed that they did not allow, that they must have support from political parties. But in many of these accounts, we see that they have distanced themselves from formal political support and from religious and community leaders. That's another interesting thing, that religious and community leaders did give support, tacit support, to the Park Circus or to the Shaheen Bagh mobilization, but they kept in the background. They allowed that women to participate. And in fact, women said that it was also a kind of a sensitizing for men who had come. One of my respondents, she says that, the most enduring picture that is there in my mind is a group of women, Muslim women, who were sitting inside, and there was a barricade around them, and all men stood outside the barricade. So that is, and men and women were singing, women were speaking, women were praying, women were crying, women were allowed to make speeches, or they were making speeches. So the thing is, this was something which was very unique. And the thing that they did was, because they brought in their multiple identities as grandmothers, as wives, as sisters, as mothers, they tried and they used their religious identities. They bridged the gap between these various identities, between men and women, between themselves and members of other community, and became a force of unification during these tumultuous times. Now I'll come to the end of the presentation by saying, what do we learn? What do we learn from these protests? See, there are continuities with the women's movement, because you see, the women's movement in India has emerged out of the experiential concerns of women. Namely, if you look at the concerns of, violence against women, anti-rape protests, or if you look at anti-dowry protests, if you look at domestic violence bill, or if you look at, all these are somehow connected to our lives, right? So in that sense, the protest by Muslim women, although the movement as such was not feminist, is also connected to their lives. So in that sense, there's a continuity. But the other thing, the important thing that they were saying is that others need not be rejected. There is a way in which you can bring in people from different, even encourage people to participate, bring in people from other communities, bring in men. Men were very integrally involved in this protest because they were part of the logistics. They took permission for women to sit. They took permission so that food would be supplied. They took permission that the covering over their heads, because they were braving the winter, that there was a covering over their heads. And they would participate in shifts. People, one set of women would come, they would stay there for a few hours, they would go back. Another set of women would come. That is the way in which they participated. So the important learning for the feminist movement is that, in the recent years, in the 1990s, the feminist movement has been broken by identity politics. They have been, so we have the right wing and we have the people who are opposed to the right wing appropriation of feminist identities. So in a way, the movement finds itself in a kind of a limbo. So here, the participation of Muslim women has shown us that though they were castigated as non-modern and subjugated, everyday practices of gendered religion could become tools of protest. And this dual emphasis on religious identities as well as Indianness, the collaboration of these two dimensions can tell us that protest tools and strategies, collaborative engagements can emerge from different histories, from different traditions, and they also show a conquest of fear. In fact, I'll just end by saying that Ranavir Shamadar uses the term, insurgent constitutionalism. He says that, this through these protests have brought the constitution to the streets. Constitution is not merely a set of laws. Through their deployment of religious identities within Indianness itself, the large-scale mobilization that we have noticed in different parts of our country, they are an attempt to build a secular India, a non-majoritarian democratic India, and the values that the Constitution enshrines, right? So, therefore, we must understand that the process of articulating equal rights as citizens means that we have to be respectful to all religions in policy and in practice. And we have to be vigilant about protecting secular notions of citizenship. Thank you.
Excellent, Dr. Sharma. This is fantastic, and as I said, just reiterates the whole thing. So I just couldn't avoid a little cynical comment. Women in protest movements is nothing new, in the sense women have always been made into kind of an instruments to be in the forefront of every protest. I mean, whether you're starting from the French Revolution to the to carrying it on further to the American civil rights movement, everywhere women have been found to be, and coming back to India, to the northeastern movements of women in the conflict situation, the borderland crisis, women have always been. But the problem happens when the negotiations take place. The actual negotiations have been known to always exclude women from taking any kind of effective policy making, or allowing them to participate in anything. So this brings us formally to the end of this wonderful this session, and on my personal behalf, I'm not even talking on behalf of IGNOU right now. I'm on my personal behalf. I feel it's been such a great opportunity to personally collaborate with each one of you, and and the way the entire panel discussion evolved. But because we when we were discussing, we thought we will have a very good discussion. We were banking on that, Professor Sen, if you remember, and Orpita, we were thinking that we must have a very good discussion. But look at the way we have planned this, and we're almost.
We can still have a little bit of discussion.
Are you there? I mean, if you guys are okay
with
it,
but Dr. Prasad and Dr. Prasad and Dr. Sen, I mean, it's their time, because
right. I know this is a very uncomfortable time. So can we take two? Yes, please.
What I wanted to say is I'm here, and if I may take a few minutes just to sort of circle back, because it has been so fantastic listening to all of you.
Absolutely.
But I will wait. I will wait until everybody's done, because I think because I started it, I could be the bookend, and I think that would create the continuity.
Yes, it's been a long time we heard you, like it's been such a long time. But yes, is Professor Banerjee here? I mean, I think all of us are almost ready to sort of pounce on her and, ask the series of things to be, are you there? And maybe I will just take the liberty of giving her a missed call just to keep her alert her that she is, but formally speaking, can we just have 3 questions, maybe? 3 questions, is that okay? So let me give a call to Dr. Banerjee. Let me see if she's there.
I raised my hand, Shridhar?
Yes, I saw that, Orpita. I saw that. Are you there?
I'm there.
Yes, she's there.
Oh, there you are. There you are. We were not ready to let you go, you see, because we have agreed, although we have very, very, we have really short our time and everything, but we've decided we'll take 3 questions, because this discussion cannot be complete without having this, this space of interaction between among us. And there's so many things that we'd like to. So I'll take 3 questions, please. And so we stand after that. Dr. Behra, are you there? Is he feeling outnumbered and he's probably gone from here?
Or
Dr.
when
Behra,
Throughout.
are you here? Dr. Behra, you're there.
Yes.
Okay.
yeah, I'm very much here, but
Here and very engaged. Thank you, Dr.
Yes.
Behra.
Yes, and a few good men. Reminds me of the movie Few Good Men, and very very bold men who were still willing to ride on the battle till the end. So the first question, Orpita.
Okay.
Okay,
I have a question and a comment both on Professor Banerjee's presentation.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay.
The comment is, I mean, her presentation. What I forgot to mention in my presentation that actually came out in her presentation, which is the role of the mother. So when we are really talking about patriarchy, I mean, the men are coming out from the womb of the mother, and Paulomi also mentioned that we do parenting, but we try to bring up the girl child more, but we hardly ever try to bring up the boy child, which is a fact, because often mothers support their sons against daughters-in-law, and sisters-in-law also support their brothers against sisters-in-law. So this is a fact of our society. And after all, the man who is a rapist comes out from the womb of a mother. So I'm not saying that the mothers are always responsible for the kind of children they would be, but at least this is an important responsibility that we can take. I mean, our role there, that at least we don't, we try to plug in the thing there, that our sons should not be disrespectful towards other women, right? That was my comment. And quickly my question, that whatever you told us about the animal kingdom, do you think that all of them are absolute, I mean, in toto, they're applicable to the case of human society? No? Okay, so why not? And
because humans think, and humans are the only animals that are cruel for recreation. No other animal are cruel for recreation. Either they are looking for mate, or they are looking to defend their territory, or they're young, but they don't do it for sport. So humans are inherently extremely cruel. And much of the power struggle that we are talking about here, male versus female, the patriarchy, is a struggle for power. So basically, when I'm a scientist in a very male-dominated world, and if I talk about the National Academies of Sciences, it's a boys' club. So the decision-making power is with boys. And in a patriarchal family also, that status quo has to be maintained. That the husband has to be listened to, and ektu maniye nena is something that is always said. I have 2 boys, and being brought up by an extremely aggressive, dominant mother, I hope will have some effect on them. No, it is not completely applicable, because in animals it is for survival, very matter of fact, survival. For us, it is recreation. Even the kindness is a recreation. As you see, the female spider eats up the male, not because she has a vendetta against the male, but because it is nutrition for her progeny. And therefore, the whole species is programmed in her functional behavior. It is not, poor guy, but the poor guy is completely driven by his hormones. And in the end, when her little spiders come out ravenous, she offers her own body, in which the nutrition from the father is also there. So we don't really see here an ego or a need for dominance. It is survival and for the betterment of the species. So it is very instinct driven, but in humans it is not. And being the single dominant species on Earth, much of the decisions that our race is taking, and COVID is a very good example. Right now, most of the male leaders around the world are taking all the worst decisions. for which, COVID-19 will write a thank you card, thank you for taking the bad decision. So my children can, survive. So probably the patriarchy also, from an evolutionary point of view, heralds in our demise. So that is caution.
Thank you very
But
much.
having
I hope,
said that,
Orpita, your question was
females
answered.
still
Have you
maintain their
have you yeah have you finished answering Professor Banerjee?
Yeah,
Have you,
one last
have,
sentence is that, like I said, the females have this parallel way of taking care of things, in a very quiet way, not really bothering with the wars and the battles and the polity and everything else. I said the food is important, nurturing of the young is important, environment is important, spirituality is important. So I guess we are doing the stuff. So it has to balance out for the survival and the health of the species.
Thank you for your answer. Just again, taking a little privilege of my position out here. That is, we agreed, as you just pointed out about your son. We agreed. I think we are bringing up our daughters very well, but the problem is that we are not bringing up our sons well. And when you there was an observation here when we said that we need to educate the next generation about what you said from a scientist's perspective, and that is not really happening. So I think we need to give a lot of importance to how we are going to communicate this scientific language to the next generation, and more so to the male of the next generation. The women are doing well. I know most daughters are doing very well. They're everything. They're efficient, they're beautiful, they're this, they're that, they're everything. But it is the men or the boys who are in a state of confusion right now. And even I don't know how it is going to happen, whether we really need dominating mothers to pave the direction, or do we need I'm really not sure about it. Maybe we can reflect on it. It gets another.
Enlightened mothers.
Yeah.
Enlightened
Yes.
mothers.
Yes,
Enlightened mothers, not dominating
enlightened
mothers.
mothers will that, yes, will that
And the father's behavior and the adult male's behavior around them is very important, because they tend to, the sub-adult males, 19, 20, 21-year-old boys tend to emulate the adult males around them.
Absolutely, so correct. This is so that we're going to take the second question. And we'll come back to Professor Sen right at the end, because we want to keep that distance of the first and the ending of your question. So the second question, please. Is there anyone?
Dr. Sujata, can I ask just to say one comment? I think Professor Rena, I think the way you explained, it should be there in school curriculum. Then I think the children, they will understand the natural selection, and they will, and I think that is the only option, because because always it worries us, the condition rape, the amount of rape is increasing without any age. Small children are getting raped. So I think that's why I pointed out that from your lecture, actually it was really helping for me to understand that this parenting technique and educating technique, what we all know, we are talking about it, but what is the way out? I think that is the scientific knowledge we can include through our curriculum. We can include this in curriculum. That's the only point I wanted to mention. Thank you.
You're so correct. Agree with you so much. Translating feminism into policy making will have to happen through the scientific communication, scientific language, how science communicates itself. And I hope Professor Banerjee, you're going to think of some of these ways of how these need to, because crime against women, all these problems that are happening, it is so rampant. It is this is, forget about discussing feminism, forget about talking about little rights at home and things. We are basically if we talk about crime against women, I was looking into the survey. There's a drastic rise in the type of crime against women in India, and it's happening both rural, urban, in both the situations. So even if you take this, I'm sure a number of things are coming from entrenched beliefs, which believes that the woman needs to be taught or put into her place, how she should be, how, and male centric vision that happens. So a second question, is there any question, or else we will, Shirupa, anything that you would, or Dr. Shoma, all right. Orpita, you have suddenly, I thought you would be, are you there?
I
Okay.
actually rescheduled my ticket. What was to be done?
Okay. So do we come to the last question? This is a question which Professor Shoma Sen is going has. Shoma, we'll take your question now.
Your mic is off.
Yes, I see it. I have so many questions, so I don't think I'll take up the time. I hope there'll be another space, or we can exchange emails or something like that, where we can actually continue to have this conversation. But I did have a comment to make, sort of a critical thinking. I know we're talking about, boys and how we need to raise boys in a certain way. And I completely understand that. However, patriarchy or any kind of dominant system, in my opinion, exists because the people that are oppressed also allows it to exist. So we have to understand that we also have women, not some of us may be enlightened, some of us are raising our kids in that way. However, there are lots of women that actually believe in patriarchy. And as long as that sort of exists, because the oppressor doesn't exist without the oppressed. And so, that is one of the comments I thought that we should keep that in mind, because we can always train the other, but we got to train and think differently globally, not just a few girls and women. So that was just a comment I had. I have lots of questions for all of you because it was so fantastic, but I will I'll hold those questions for a later time. But if you give me a few minutes, I'd like to circle this back when you're ready.
Yeah. This is, of course, what you just said, and I think what you just said is so very important, and it also comes from from the paradigm that Orpita had spoken about, and the Vedanta paradigm, which basically is talking about the whole coming together of the women's community and supporting each other. And it need not necessarily be women coming together and supporting each other. It has to happen within the universal framework of welfare and caring and loving and sharing and all that. So whatever it is, ultimately we've seen, love wins over anything, and universal love has won over so many things when hatred has failed. And there was a question which I had brought up in my last webinar, which was on man making of Swami Vivekananda, and I was trying to say, is it possible that like the way societies have created deliberately, societies have created hate societies. I mean, look at the Nazis, look at any of these countries. It was a deliberate creation, eugenicism and all kind of things. So is it possible that we may go the Vivekananda path and create a society which is again a deliberate society of universal love? So it really means that love is not intrinsic, but it is almost taught that this is the only way available. This is the only way where one can win or one can achieve anything. So there is nothing called intrinsically that this person is kind, so she behaves in this particular way. No, it is a social endeavor to create a society where people are taught how to love and how to integrate love and universal love and caring and sharing into daily activities. So, I mean, Hitler got away by creating a Nazi society where everybody was hating each other. So what stops us from creating a society where everybody loves each other and includes each other and being thing? And that's my last note of, a positive note, which I was just wanting to think. And here this becomes the most most enriching part and also the most exciting part when I invite the most powerful man in this forum right now to take up the baton of thanking. And so here, there's Dr. Behra, who's going to deliver the official vote of thanks. Thank you very much for joining us and being with us for this long. You just did not think that there would be a different kind of thing and you could ignore it. I mean, it happens most of the time. But thank you very much. Dr. Behra, please, would you give that vote of thanks?
Thank you, madam. On behalf of Indira Gandhi National Open University Regional Center, Kolkata, and my own behalf, I would like to thank all the distinguished speakers who have presented their views on this particular forum, that should women have a question? Definitely. If they do not have any question, then how can the civilization move on? So that is the thing. At the outset, I would like to thank Professor Soma Sen, School of Social Work, San Jose State University. Thank you, ma'am, for being with us and shared your views on this particular topic. Dr. Arpita Mistra, Department of History in Kaji Nazrul University, Asansol. Her topic on Sri Sarada Devi was really a good and inspiring topic for all of us. No doubt, even if she has no formal education, but the spiritual thought, teachings she has given to the society is really marvelous. So thank you, madam, for your topic. Professor Ina Rai Energy, ma'am. Really, ma'am, you have your data really an eye opener for me, because I did not know whether the female organism in the creation really a very good and very responsible element for the entire good civilization in future. So it is really a drastic information, and it should be like Palomi madam was telling, it should be included in our school curriculum. Unless and until we inculcate this kind of information in the minds of the students, it will remain in a book knowledge only. So it should be very much practical, like she was telling, that very offense on the women are rising. Being a man, what I believe, and being a father of two children, boys, what I think, we are not teaching our children properly. And one day we are talking about one of one of the friend of my son, elder son. In his class, he was telling that there are two poets. They fight each other. They fought each other in the class, and when the both of them returned home, one of the mother is telling, one of the father is telling, you have returned empty-handed. You should have given two slaps on his back or whatever. Then if all the parents will say like that, then what will happen in the school situation, school classroom? So we should think of that, and keeping in mind that thinking, we should train our kids in such a way so that the social irresponsible behavior should be minimized. And more or less, what I believe, we should have one boy, at least one boy and one girl also. Both boy, if the parents really they are fortunate who have one boy and one girl, because
do you have a choice?
They are each other, then only they can understand the real social behavior and social sharing. Otherwise, most of the cases what I have seen in the rape case, those who have not grown up with the girl siblings, either their own brother and sister or their cousins, they are more aggressive, what I believe. So in the very beginning, they should be shared with that thinking. Anyway, this is my personal view. Then Dr. Paulomi madam, really your historical fact really encouraging. And as I have already comment on the chart box, it's if it is not there in the school curriculum, then again we are just forgetting or we are ignoring knowingly our own history. So it should be incorporated in the school curriculum. Otherwise, what had happened, we do not know. What was the role of Gargi? Then so many women intellectuals were there. We do not know even. We even do not know their name. Forget about their biography. Who are they? We do not know. So it should be there in the school curriculum, at least school curriculum. Then Professor Shirupa Prasad, madam, your presentation was very good. In fact, though it was somehow the audio was breaking, but your concluding remark was really good. And thank you for being with us, for sharing your views in this international webinar. Then, last but not least, Soma Chaudhary, madam, really your sociological point of view that the religious community, which is really, you see, triple talaq. One of my student here, she is really isolated. She is abandoned. Nothing, but the only reason is she was not following the instruction of her husband. Then all of a sudden triple talaq. Then now she is living in a miserable condition. But you see, it is very easy to say, oh, okay, you can go for second one, you can go for third one. How many? It is not a joke. Simply, it is not a joke. But without any, definite fault or very crucial situations created in the, particularly in the Muslim community. So, unless and until the women empowerment is there, the entire episode of talking all these things will be very not very fruitful. So, thank you all of you, for being with us, and especially thank you, Sujata ma'am, who has, conceptualized this particular topic. So thank you very much. And lastly and not least, all the listeners, all the participants, our academic counselors, students, learners, and other members who have joined with us. And lastly, Dr. Shiv Kumar GN, the Regional Director of IGNOU Regional Center, Kolkata, who has given us this opportunity to interact and learn so many discourses on a particular topic, that is women has a question, and it should be further propagated that yes, we should have a question in our mind. Unless and until we have the question, we do not have the solution. So with these words, I thank you all once again, and thank you, and stay safe, stay healthy in this
Yes.
COVID
All right.
pandemic, because really yesterday one of my friend passed away due to the COVID. So I'm really very upset. So anyway, what to do? So all these things are there. So I pray God to have our good health, and hopefully we will meet again in this platform in future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Banerjee, is the third wave really going to happen? Is the
Oh,
third,
yeah.
I mean, huh? It's
Yeah,
on. It is, right?
absolutely. Yeah,
We,
made in
we are,
Bengal, Delta Plus.
Nobody in Asansol is wearing a mask on the street, huh? Nobody.
Oh,
I mean, maybe